Out there, and welcome to the No Shit Cast. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. A really cool musical guest lined up on the line with us tonight. His name's Ian Staer, a friend of Eric's, our acquaintance, and they got some history. It's kind of interesting stuff. Sitting in the co-pilot seat as usual, the Gray Wizard of Historical Knowledge himself, Mr. Eric Smith. How you doing tonight, Bubba?
Doing very well, sir. How are you?
Not too bad. So Ian came on and immediately diagnosed a problem with my mixing board setup.
It was awesome.
And helped us fix some stuff. So he's now officially my new favorite person in the whole world. But he's sitting on the line with us. Ian, how you doing today, Bubba?
I'm doing fantastic, and I will send you an invoice for the engineering fee.
By all means, yes. Please just bill that right out. It says that's that old joke, right? The engineer goes and puts a chalk mark on the pipe and says, "There's your problem," and charges him $9,000. And he says it was $8,999 for knowing where to put the chalk mark and $1 for the chalk mark. You know? So thank you for knowing where to put the chalk mark, man. I really appreciate that.
Sometimes it all comes down to one piece of chalk in the right spot.
That's it. So anyway, you guys, you and Eric are both into a lot of the same types of music. You're both composers. You very much, it looks like, I've listened to some of your work just very recently because Eric made the introduction. I love it. It's got a very ambient sort of feel to it. But I know there's a lot of other stuff you do. But we just kind of like to always start off with our guests. Welcome to the show. Welcome to our little soiree here. But so this is the part of the meeting, where we would say, now stand up and tell us something about yourself, right? So, so let's start back at the beginning with you. I mean, has music always been something you've been into, or was this something you picked up later? And start us off on kind of how you started getting involved in writing and composition and performance and things like that.
Sure. I guess really it kind of all strangely kicked off. I was in 8th grade and something in me said, "Mom, I want a guitar." I don't know why I wanted a guitar, but all of a sudden, like, that was my thing. I had gone through skateboarding and freestyle BMX and paintball and all that, the typical things that, that you experience as a child of the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
And I guess it was my turn on the dice. I rolled a random D6 and it said guitar.
That was it, huh? It's the most accessible instrument for a lot of people when they start out, too.
Now, were you ever in band before that in school or anything?
There was an abortive attempt at attempting to try to play the flute when I was maybe in 2nd grade. I don't know what I was thinking. I think it was because my cousin had a flute and I was just doing that emulating thing.
Yeah.
I had never had lessons, and I didn't realize that being in band in school didn't mean that they gave you lessons. It just meant that you were in band.
Right.
So there was a misconception there and a false start. I failed horrifically at it. Couldn't read music. It was extremely stressful. And I handed the flute back in defeat. And I said, I don't think this isn't a good fit. Thank you very much. We wish you we wish you well in your future endeavors, but thank you for playing.
Well, and you said that was like 2nd grade too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a major missing component, and I swear that this is a thing, especially for male musicians, is that what woos women. And you know what I mean? Like that there's a big part of this that has to do with, or whatever it is, to woo a partner kind of thing.
I was going to say, that's a very heteronormative stance.
It very is, but I can only speak to it with any kind of knowledge from the standpoint that I'm at, right? And I would say that, I made this joke one time. You tell people you're a guitarist because telling them that I masochistically hurt myself to play music that impresses women gets you thrown in a nut house, right? You can't do that. So you have to say, oh, I'm a guitarist. But yeah, well, I mean, there's that component where that emotional piece of it sort of kicks in that happens later. I think later in life is sort of what I'm alluding to, right? And
yeah. I mean, I picked up the guitar, and I think it was probably, more a function of, like you said, it was what was accessible. I grew up in an area of southern New Jersey, which, I mean, currently now is famous for two things: the show Jersey Shore and a horrible opioid epidemic.
Uh, uh,
um, yeah. So there's that. But not very much in the way of. I'll eventually come back to it and then kind of land the plane, but there was not much in the way of accessibility to the current instrumentation with which I find myself kind of absorbed.
hmm. Well, we
So you go into a music store, they've got a bunch of guitars hanging on the wall, and it was easier to get access to.
sure, yeah, yeah.
And sorry,
No, no good. Sorry.
at the time I was, um, you know, gosh, it was, let's say, 1989. You know what I mean? So it was
Okay.
like Guns N' Roses on the radio.
Oh
Motley
yeah.
Crue had, Dr. Feelgood, and Metallica had just, blown the world up with And Justice for All, and
Mm.
um, you know, metal and rock and roll were still, we're still kind of riding that crest of, butt rock and glam rock and stuff that kind of characterized the 80s. But quietly over in the corner, two things were kind of standing over there. You had the synth pop, which had happened and not really gone away. New wave had given way to things like Information Society and Pet Shop Boys and Depeche Mode and stuff, and those things were still happening.
Duran
And that was
Duran.
what yeah, absolutely. And that was one group of kids at school, and then there was at the time, my crowd, which was the, you know, BMX riding, D&D playing, skateboarding kids that were listening to more, rock and roll and metal and whatever.
Hmm.
So, um, but I was, from an early age, I was also into sci-fi and cyberpunk, which we could talk about that for, a hot minute, for how, at 3 years prior, in like 1986 or whatever it was, here's little old me seeing a Coke commercial with Max
Max
Headroom.
Headroom.
Yeah, exactly. And going,
I remember that.
the brakes locked up immediately. And I was like, what
What's
is
going
this?
on?
Everything just changed.
Now, did
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
did you experience Max Headroom as a part of the Art of Noise too?
Exactly.
Yeah, me
Totally,
too.
you took that exact, and that's how I found the art of noise, and that's
Yep.
how I found that electronic music was a thing,
Yeah,
and
I think
how
me
that
too.
like dovetailed into, okay, that explains, again, I had babysitters that had a lot of the new wave records, and so I was exposed in a very good way to Dead or Alive, and
Yeah.
Depeche Mode and the Thompson Twins and Duran Duran, and the stuff that you know again, heteronormatively speaking, was more of like, this is what the girls in school were listening to, and then us guys over here were listening to like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses
Yeah,
and Metallica and Megadeth.
Metallica. Yeah,
Now,
Judas
see,
Priest,
but-
baby.
at that time, I
Black
was
Sabbath.
firmly over in the female group with the Duran Duran and all of that.
And there was a big dichotomy that was happening because of
There
that. Because I
was.
was like,
Yeah,
well,
big
I really like this music over here, and how do I reconcile that? And we'll talk about how years later, you know what I mean, when like 1992 or something like that rolled around, but and that's when those two worlds really kind of collided together. But for the time being, at the time that it was in 1989 or whatever, you know, I was firmly in the, oh man, I'm all about this guitar thing. So I picked up guitar, and I realized I'm spending 20 minutes talking about something that historically has very little, very little impact. But I think it was kind of like at least
Well,
It was formative.
No, but
right?
no,
Sure.
I think it's important. Yeah, man, I think it's
Yeah.
important because it shows that you had an entry into this world through guitar and that kind of music. But then, like
Yeah.
to me, it sounds like you almost kind of stumbled upon where your heart lied. You know?
For real. Yeah, that's
Eh,
kind of how it happened. So,
eh,
I throughout, the end of middle school, the beginning of high school, I would jam with other friends, and we would play lots of like, the traditional two guitar metal and hard rock bands. So like
mhm.
Megadeth, Iron Maiden, Metallica, Slayer, anything that had two guitars in it, I would pretty much adopt the rhythm guitar role. I would let someone else do the leads because I wasn't super coordinated to do all the wheedly stuff. And I didn't really want it. I'm really not. I'm not a. I like to say this, fairly frequently, but I'm not a lead guitarist sort of personality. I don't want to be out front. I don't want to have a spotlight on me. I don't want to be, hey everybody, look at me kind of a thing. That's not what I'm about. I'm not really an ego-driven sort of person, and no, and I mean that as
it's so true though.
Literally.
Archetypically speaking, everyone knows exactly who's in a band knows exactly what you're talking about for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And those people add a great dynamic to a group dynamic.
Sure,
You know what I mean? Like they bring a certain energy to the
They're
group.
necessary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's a good balance to be struck between, like, I wouldn't consider myself a front man by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I play in several bands, and even in the project, which is my titular project, my eponymous project, whatever you want to call it, where I'm the, the main poobah, whatever, chief cook and bottle washer. I'm doing all the heavy lifting. I still don't really occupy much space as far as, me. I'm there, but I'm not really, I don't sing, I don't stand up, I don't really generally even, this sounds weird, but I don't even directly address the audience all that much.
Right.
I'm there as a conduit. This sounds so pretentious, but
No.
I'm more there as a conduit or a facilitator toward the performance.
Yeah.
I'm not there to this, again, this sounds so friggin' pretentious, but like, I'm not there to like bask in adulation.
Right.
I'm just there to kind of, facilitate
The
an
music.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's
exactly.
But in every instance, there is, in every successful instance of this kind of situation, you do often find that there's somebody that fills that role. It's necessary.
Sure. Well, and sometimes it's fulfilled just in the actions that you do and stuff. Like the people that really dig on that kind of music and listen to it and trip on it, they're also going to trip on your manipulation of the situation and the ambiance and the machines.
Yeah.
Because that's part of what I like to watch, when somebody's doing something like that. I just like them. It's almost like they're meditating.
That you nailed it. I mean, literally that word, like meditative is a adjective that I try to use when I describe what it is that I'm doing. So, I mean, that paints a very specific picture, when you say that something is meditative, you could say this is, oh man, this is kind of repetitive. You know what I mean? Like, wow, 22-minute long songs, huh? Boy, like,
well,
but the trick is, personally, from my experience, I feel like, there's some stuff that I've been able to tune into musically, just as a listener, that I don't even you listen to some Tangerine Dream stuff, from like the 70s, like Ricochet,
Yep.
right? And that's a jumping off point for anybody listening. Like, go back and listen to the song Ricochet Part 2 off of the album Ricochet. It's a live album. That song is like 20 minutes long, and you can listen to it and it sounds fresh in 2019.
This used
you know what I mean? It sounds completely fresh, and you realize this was done live by 3 musicians.
Right.
It's not multi-track. There's no laptop. There's no DAW. There's no, like,
they're literally holding the ambiance themselves.
Yeah. And it doesn't get boring. There's always something going on, or there's other artists, where you can listen to stuff like, there's krautrock bands like Neu, NEU. And, they've got some tracks where, like there's just this rhythmic figure that just, kind of keeps going throughout, like a 12-minute song.
Yeah.
And
what happened? Not to go down a wormhole here, man, but let me ask you a question. I'd like your opinion on this, because we saw a lot of this stuff in the 70s. We saw there were bands like Rush that did these big instrumental pieces, these long, protracted, different. 2112 was like an entire album side. Pink Floyd did a lot of this kind of stuff. They would definitely do these weird, like 20, 30-minute long jazz blues sort of trippy jams.
Shine On You Crazy Diamond.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, look at that jam. Like, that is a jam.
Where are that? I mean, you would think today with the prominence of things like meditation and everything, and I'm not pissing on that in any way. I'm saying that it is just a product of society today, that a lot of people are starting to get more into chilling the hell out. And but this piece is missing. Like, where is this music at today? Well, like the Pink Floyds, and that made these big moving, ambient pieces.
I gotta say, that's one of the reasons why I was attracted to your music, because you were filling that role. I told Matt, I said, man, I
think it would be like super, like everybody would be, because like they were with Floyd, like they were with these bands that did this stuff today, would be super prominent kind of thing, right? Wouldn't you?
It's still there, I kind of I feel like we're kind of like jumping ahead in the narrative, but we may as well pursue this conversation.
Okay, I could be taking us down a wormhole.
No,
I admit
it's fine.
that.
No, it's great. Like, I think we should just jump off from here, and we're going to jump around, and everybody can kind of follow this, like, like the plot to Pulp Fiction. It all comes around eventually, and you're just going to see little windows from here to here, and it's going to come together. You're going to back the camera out. You're going to be able to see the entire storyline. And it's very nonlinear, but I'm into it. So, coming at this particular project, my solo project, which is Staer, that's my last name. It's Staer. It's spelled in a very stylized way. It's ST Delta ER. So if you're looking it up on iTunes or whatever, it's ST on a Mac keyboard. Alt and J makes that little triangle ER. So ST triangle ER. And there's a reason for that. It's copyrights. I came into doing this project in 2014 from a history of having done some with marginal success, doing some sort of sound alike. I was really into making future pop, if you want to call it that, in what most people know as like club industrial music, or hard dance music, that like it kind of straddled the kids in black dancing to doo, 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 and then kids with like big pants and glow sticks dancing to doo, doo. There was like this Venn diagram that overlapped in a really big way that I saw happening when I would go to like raves in the late 90s, when like Richie Houghton would be playing at some gargantuan warehouse party. And he would mix in, like, if you go back to Richie Houghton's album Dex Effects in 909, he's dropping Nitzer Ebb, Let Your Body Learn over top of this banging techno track. And me as a kid who was kind of had both feet, in each one of those buckets of, okay, I like techno, but I also like industrial. There was this big Venn diagram overlap, happening where, and even in the early aughts, when you had this future pop thing happening, which, I'm going to be throwing out a bunch of terms that people can start Googling, but, bands like, V&V Nation and Apoptygma Berserk and Covenant, they were taking these, styles that were previously very separate from one another. You had industrial music, which was like Frontline Assembly and Skinny Puppy and, bands like that. And they're merging it with a much more techno focused, dance floor focused sound of, to use big names that people would recognize that sound more like, Paul Oakenfold and, that Ferry Corsten.
Maybe Moby or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Moby's a great touchstone to like more of a more mainstream popularized form of it. But historically, industrial music was always hand in hand with techno stuff, at least in Germany. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, sure.
They would exist in the same spaces.
Yeah.
But, that scene really started to kind of come together at that point. And it was like, all right, here's these two great flavors that I personally enjoy, but now they're being presented together. Wow, this is really disruptive. I like it. This is like, wow, we're kind of having a paradigm shift here. But then it never evolved past that, And so I really died on the vine with that as far as being inspired by it anymore. So I was like, all right, you know what? It's at the point where I don't feel I have a voice here. I don't feel like I'm adding anything new to the conversation. There's bands that kind of took that to its logical progression, and they're doing it very, very well. I mean, I don't want to name drop, but like I am friends with some of those bands. You know what I mean? I've worked with them as a lighting director. I've toured with some of them. And I've sometimes even played shows as either, direct support or whatever for them. And I'm still involved in that scene to a decent amount. You know what I mean? Like I still, I count those people amongst my friends.
Sure. Yeah.
And, you know, I'm not, I don't want to sound as if I'm bad mouthing at all. I'm just going, wow, these guys are really good at this thing over here. And I'm just really kind of, mediocre at best. I mean, like, I don't think I can advance this further past where it is right now. So let me try to come at this from a different angle. And the first time I ever played live as Staer, I had already, done some work. I had done an EP, and I was playing at a record shop here in Philadelphia, which is kind of it was a renaissance of a historic name. Anybody that's been into the independent electronic industrial scene in the US may know of Digital Underground Records. They were in Philadelphia for a really long time. They were the record store that spawned Metropolis Records, which most people, I mean, that's a big name in that scene.
Yep.
Metropolis came out of Digital Underground Records. Dave Heckman, the guy that owned Digital Underground, founded Metropolis. So that's where that was from.
Okay.
And then as Metropolis took off as a label, I don't want to sit here and claim to be an authority on it, but I mean, these people are my friends. I know them. So I shopped at that record store a
you've
lot.
probably got a lot better insight than any, most anybody else, given the situation, right?
if they'd like to come in and be a guest on the podcast, they can clarify any statement.
Right.
Absolutely.
For historical accuracy. But, as someone who was at least there, the record store was it was a cornerstone of the community. As a kid, I would get their mail order catalogs, and I would be just like dying to find out what these records sounded like. And all I had to go on was, 2 or 3 sentences in a printed black and white catalog that I would get every quarter, from Digital Underground. And they eventually closed the retail store, and they sold it to another cat who operated it, and kept the store physically there. But it wasn't Digital Underground anymore. And fast forward many years, almost 2 decades, and the store was resurrected, and now the third owner of that operation in that space, got permission to bring back the name Digital Underground. Okay. And so now it's operating as Digital Underground with the OG logo and the whole nine. A guy named Joe Scott, who has been, I thank him on the liner notes on my latest record. He's just been a super cool guy. He's an independent promoter in town, and also does some shipment and fulfillment for a couple of fairly big labels in the scene. And also operates his own little indie label and does stuff. But that's my plug for Joe. But he invited me to play I'm going to land the plane, I promise.
No, you're fine, man.
I'm intrigued. You got me hooked.
You are not doing anything wrong. Keep it up, please.
It was like a VIP event for the grand reopening and rechristening of the space. And we had a couple people come in and do some live electronic performances, and I came in, and there were a bunch of people from around the city and from the scene that, I knew from around. And I was like, hey, everybody, I'm not usually one for making announcements on the microphone, but thanks to Joe for bringing me into play here. Some of you are familiar with my older material, because I was like a very minor hit. In the Philadelphia club scene. I had done a cover of Tears for Fears' Mad World after having seen Donnie Darko and hearing the version that Michael Andrews did. I mean, everybody's familiar with that tune if you've seen the film Donnie Darko. It blew my freaking mind when I saw the movie, and like that song in that scene is just like, I mean, I was really moved by it, and I was like, wow, that's, and that's a pretty accessible chord progression. And I was at my friend Andy's house, and I went over to he has like a little digital piano, and I was like, let me see if I can pick out that chord progression. All right, cool. Yeah. All right. It's in F. All right. Yeah. I could do something with that. All right, cool. And then I went home and I diddled around with it, and I made this pretty stomping, like, future pop version. It's not available anywhere. Don't ask. It's my one attempt at singing on a record. It sounded decent. It sounds kind of like the Crew Shadows. And I I gave it to one of the local DJs and he played it and whatever. And it was great. It used to fill the floor, and it was like this cool little ego stroke thing that, I had made this track that all my club friends would dance to. And, we would do, hilarious little pantomimes to it and whatever. But I said to everybody, all right, so you may be familiar with that. This is something different. This is what happens when I took my drum machines and I put them in a corner and I made them think about what they'd done. There were no rhythms to be heard anywhere, very minimal rhythmic structure. It was very about sound and soundscape and live manipulation. I had some dialogue clips from a few obscure sci-fi films that I was, putting through tons of delay and doing dub style, cascading delay effects and stuff like that to just kind of make it kind of all wash together and become indistinct.
That was definitely a word that kind of comes to mind with the stuff I've listened to you of your work that I've listened to already was cinematic. And you were remarking how moved you were by that film. And I was like, wow, that really clicks now. I see where that inspiration comes from. So you like the big sweeping sort of cinematic themes as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Big time. Like even in my description on Bandcamp, I had to kind of create a little, 2-sentence thing that kind of contextualizes where I'm at. And I think I name drop like Moby, Alessandro Cortini, and John Murphy. And everybody's like, who the hell is John Murphy? John Murphy's the guy who did the score for a couple of Danny Boyle movies. Have you seen the movie Sunshine?
No, I haven't.
Nope.
Sunshine's a fantastic movie. It's got Cillian Murphy in it, Michelle Yeoh, Benedict Wong is in it, and it's a great film. And the conceit of the film is great. It's about this team of scientists that are aboard a ship that is towing the remainder of Earth's fissile materials towards the sun because the sun is dying and life on Earth is about to kind of go into a permanent ice age.
Mm-hmm.
And their job is to literally yeet into the sun everything on Earth that is capable of creating nuclear fission. And it's not even just that they are, and the reason they've got the last of it is that there was a previous mission that failed for some unbeknownst reason. So their job is to kind of go there, yeet this pile of uranium into the sun. I mean, it's a gigantic, it's a huge payload, but also to find out why the first mission failed. And it's literally like this very, I would say, hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
But it's Danny Boyle. It's the guy that did 28 Days Later and Slumdog Millionaire,
Yep.
Train Spotting. I mean, so again, all these films,
it's going to be compelling as hell. Is what it's going to
super compelling.
Yeah.
And if you think about all those films, Slumdog Millionaire, Train Spotting, 28 Days Later, they're all really driven by the score and the soundtrack.
Right.
You think back to 28 Days Later and they had, Godspeed You Black Emperor, in some certain key scenes, and it's super cinematic, and it's like, wow, this is absolutely it's almost like it's a plot element. And you've got everybody, I mean, of a certain age remembers Train Spotting, you know what I mean? And that was a huge movie for underground electronic music. It blew up Underworld, you know what I mean? Underworld's Born Slippy is pivotal to certain plot moments. And
you kind of feel like that there was a point where there was a piece of technology or a way of manipulating instrument, music through a technological sense where you feel like was your turning point, where you sort of dug in then and said, now I can go. Was it inspired that way by available capability? You think that motivated this change, or was this sort of the way you were always going to head anyway?
Going into the ambient thing?
Yeah, well, especially using a lot more of the sort of tools that are available, like the keyboards and the synths and Eric's always talking about, what's the drum machine you're always talking about? The 80. The Roland, you sent me a video on it.
808?
The 808, right? And for a lot of people, I'm finding in hip hop, when that came out was like a game changer.
Sure.
It just like changed everybody. Like it made that approach to music, which prior to then I think was very much like the hip, the hop, the hippity, the hip hop hop. You don't stop rock. Like those that kind of was very swingy and all of this. And then all of a sudden, man, there was this like bam, chunk, bam, bam. Like this change, and it was that drum machine.
And as an adjunct,
we could talk about drum machines for an hour.
Well,
I could talk to you about the impact the 808 had. I could talk about the Linn drum and how that shaped the music.
Was there a piece of equipment for you then that was sort of the aha moment or that epiphanous moment that was like, wait a minute, I'm going to do something totally different, and it was because of that availability?
And I'm guessing at some point that transitional period or transcendent period maybe is when you realized the amount of control that you had over sound.
Yeah. And when you hear the answer, you're going to go, yeah, of course, that's the answer.
Okay.
Because it was a particular piece of machinery or anything that you came across that really just made you want to start creating with that piece of machinery or that piece of software or something that you've seen somebody do, like maybe watching someone like Howard Jones for the first time run a whole group of machines in front of an audience and be just fine because, being in a band sometimes is like being married.
Yeah.
Polyamorously too. Ugh.
Here's exactly how it went down. One of the other things I do besides music is I have been a lighting director for a bunch of bands. I've toured as the guy who makes the flashy, blinky, blinky on stage for a bunch of acts. I'll run off a few of them, and a bunch of people will probably be shocked, but these are the people that I've been on the road with. Smash Mouth, Blues Traveler, Gin Blossoms, Uncle Kracker, Sugar Ray, Eve Six, Better Than Ezra, and then in the more indie underground section of things, more recently I did a US tour with IMX, and one of the things that kicked all this off was I've done 2 US tours with a band called Atari Teenage Riot.
Okay.
Now, Atari Teenage Riot, if you're unfamiliar with them, they are a product of the early to mid 90s. They're from Germany. They're extremely aggressive electronic music. And they have had a lot of critical acclaim over the years. They're extremely political, extremely, because of having grown up in the climate of, the aftermath of the Cold War, with the Berlin Wall coming down and Alec Empire, who's the principal in the band, having grown up in that environment. They have a very, anti-authoritarian, anti-fascist stance, and they're very politically active. And they made extremely disruptive music. It was very punk in that sense, that that politicized music, which it was very polarizing. They literally caused riots at some shows where they played. And they did a lot in the 90s. They toured for a while as a support act with Nine Inch Nails, Sony used some of their music without their permission as advertising for one of the PlayStation systems.
That's right. Now it's ringing a bell. I've heard of this. I didn't know who it was though. Yeah.
Yeah. And that came to bite them later. We'll talk about that in a minute. But through some connections I had, I was asked, hey, Atari Teenage Riot's going to be they've got a record coming out. It's the first record they've done in a while. They're going to be doing a US tour. They need a lighting director. We think you would be a fantastic fit because you're into the music, and you would just be a really good personality fit with being on the road with this band. And so of course I was like, yeah, sounds great. You know what I mean? I was a little intimidated because, Alec Empire as a musician is very, I'm telling you, critically very well regarded. You know what I mean? Like, they're not everybody's cup of tea, but they're a very critically well regarded band. And they've done work with, like I said, they were direct support for Nine Inch Nails. The sound of it, sort of
a Frank Zappa vibe kind of thing, where
kind of, yeah. Where like this is a band that musicians listen to.
Gotcha.
Atari Teenage Riot was quoted by, I believe, Trent Reznor, but also definitely Charlie Clouser. Charlie Clouser will tell you to your face that one of the vibes they were going for when they recorded the song "The Perfect Drug" with Nine Inch Nails was they were trying to go for, as they say, this Atari Teenage Riot vibe with this really frenetic, broken, really cut up sounding drum sound, and that's like where all that super cut up vocals and like that drum and bass influence, like all that kind of stuff. That was very informed by the time they had spent around Alec and Atari Teenage Riot. So here I am out on the road with this band, and it was a van tour, and we're riding along in the van, and the conversations were going everywhere. They would talk about politics, we would talk about the economy, we would talk about differences between life in America versus life in Europe and
So social
Germany.
relevance kind of stuff.
Sure.
Big,
I mean,
yeah.
but we were a very diverse group. You know what I mean? We had pretty much we had one representational person from male, female, African American, Asian American, white people, we had a Cuban sound guy, Cuban American sound guy from Florida, like there was a lot of representation in that little minivan that we were cruising around in. I mean, there were a lot of voices and a lot of people being heard and a lot of people adding really cool perspectives to it all. So there was a lot of really just amazing discussion in that van. That by itself was it was worth doing the job. You know what I mean? It was worth living in a van for a month,
cool.
And then, so, we play in LA, and here's Kevin Key from Skinny Puppy, hanging out with us backstage. And like, here I am having sushi with Kevin Key. And eventually conversation drifts to synthesizers, and Ian is into synthesizers too, and we start talking about this, that, the next thing, whatever, and, one of our opening acts, a local opener at a couple of these shows, was a cat named Surachai, Surachai. He's a black metal electronic artist. He does, like super, technical black metal, but also with a lot of electronic influence. And he had a modular synthesizer, which I knew existed, and I had played around very fleetingly a few years prior.
All right, so
with
for the listeners, explain that, because that's significant,
Sure.
right? Modular synthesizer.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I'm about to land the plane.
Oh, good.
So,
okay, gotcha.
A modular synthesizer is, when you look at, you see these, when you look at pictures of the 70s guys like Rick Wakeman or whatever, and they've got these big, huge contraptions with all sorts of knobs and patch cables drooping everywhere, and it just looks like someone threw a pot of spaghetti at a air traffic control console.
It's like an old telephone room type looking thing. Yeah.
Exactly. I was just going to say, it's like, and then you can patch someone in from Chicago to Los Angeles on a long distance telephone call. It's one of those things. So, this guy had one, and I was like, yeah, like I had never seen. There's a couple different formats. There's the big old ones that what are called 5U, which is the ones that look like the old Moog synthesizers, and so they've got a black faceplate with silver knobs, and they look very refined. You know what I mean? They're very conservative. They're not very flashy. But this one was different. This one was a little bit smaller of a form factor, and it had all these really cool names in the modules. There was one in there called the Piston Honda, which if you're like a video game guy, you're like, that's from like that's a video game reference. And then there was other ones like the anyway, they all had very like characteristic names. They weren't just this is the A130 module,
right,
or the
like
Q114 module. This, like, they all had like names, and it was really, I was looking at like some of the panel graphics. I'm like, man, this looks really
awesome.
There's something going on here.
Now, were you listening to anybody like Morton Subotnick or anything like that at this time, or had you encountered that person or anything? Or
Not yet. not yet. And that's the rabbit hole.
Okay.
So I started like, exploring, all right, this modular thing, that's interesting. So on days off on this tour, I would, spend a day in the hotel room in a town like Cleveland. We had a day off and we went to go see the movie Drive. So here's the entirety of Atari Teenage Riot, me, the tour manager, and our sound guy, who is actually a electronic artist in his own right. It's a guy named Otto von Schirach.
Wow.
He's on Monkey Town Records with who else is on Monkey Town? Mode Selector and a couple other bands like that. We're all, just doing something on our day off. We go to see a movie. We go to a bowling alley, and so here we are bowling. And if anybody walked up, they'd be like, "Oh my God, am I actually seeing this right now?
Yeah, right.
It's actually this bad." We're just like, yeah, whatever. And so we go back up to the hotel room, and I'm sitting on my laptop, and I'm starting to look at, all right, maybe I should, take a look and see what this modular synthesizer thing is all about. And so, as I'm, racking up per diem on the tour and getting my weekly paychecks and whatever, I start to think to myself, maybe there's something to this. And, I got a great opportunity to, have some people who are extremely knowledgeable
In the
about this
know,
stuff,
right.
talking to me
Yeah.
about it. While my interest is being stoked in it,
Wow.
it's being stoked by cats like Kevin Key and
Right.
Alec Empire. So like, this isn't just reading about it in a magazine. This is
No.
like,
Legit.
I've got these guys
one-on-one.
that have,
It's like an
exactly.
apprenticeship.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just shutting up and listening to these cats talk about, oh yeah, I use this for blah, 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 blah. Maybe, you should maybe on a day off, next time you come through, you can come play in my studio and doodle around. So,
Wow.
I started to think, all right, maybe there's something to this. It looks a little expensive, but, maybe eventually. So fast forward to the end of the tour, I come home and I've got, a decent amount of money burning a hole in my pocket. And I go up north to North Jersey. There's a shop up there called Three Wave Music, which is like, it's a synthesizer playground. If anyone wants to go on while they're listening to this podcast and just go to threewavemusic.com, spelled out like you think it would be, and just look at their landing page. They've got a photograph, which if you're into keyboards, you'll just die. It's a gigantic showroom full of everything from the 70s on through right now.
Wow.
And it's like a museum that you can buy stuff at.
Wow.
It's like the Northeast's equivalent to Switched On Music in Austin, which is like the shop that, the guys from Survive that did the score for Stranger Things, like they worked at a shop like that. It's
Right.
like that, but not in Texas.
Wonder if they have any
amazing.
of those Yamaha DX Model 2s that were like kind of white or whatever, silver white. You know what I'm talking about?
Wait, man,
Did
you
you ever
got,
see one of those?
you're taking us down the.
No, I was just curious because like I was thinking, I don't know, it's just what it made me think of. There was like these Yamaha.
Well, it makes it so. There's these like eclectic places out because there's a lot of these type of places for guitars. There's a lot of these type of places for drums. Like there are certain music shops you want to go to.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
really, really into a certain instrument that just sort of has.
Yeah.
So you're kind of saying that this is the same. This is one of those places, but for electronic synth,
Sure.
sort of derived music, right?
Yeah. There's a couple places. There's in New York City, there's a place called Control that's out in Brooklyn. That's a synthesizer only shop, but they specialize in modular synthesizers. So you're not even going to really find keyboards. So, I mean, they have a couple of keyboards, but like Three Wave is like a keyboard shop and they do a fair amount of modular, but it's primarily a keyboard store. And then Control in Brooklyn is mostly modular with a little bit of keyboard stuff
That's
going
cool.
on.
Yeah, it's like Eric's like writing this stuff. Hang on, he's
No,
like, hang on, I'm taking
I'm
notes here.
here
Give me-
Oh yeah. Prepare to watch your paychecks, stop being take-home pay,
Yeah.
and they're going to be send there pay. So I walk in there,
Oh,
and
no.
I had my eyes on a synthesizer called, at the time it was the Prophet 08 by Dave
Ooh.
Smith Instruments, and it
Yeah.
was it was like one of the first. We had
You
this.
getting misty over there, Bubba? He's like, ooh, yeah.
You know,
It was,
so-
at
so
the
you
time,
know
it
it,
was
you know.
it was sweet, man.
Yeah, it was one of the first real rebirths of um what I could say is mass produced analog polyphonic synthesizers, and I'll define those terms for you. So analog means it's not digital, it's not a computer inside, it's actually circuitry inside the synthesizer that's, discrete components, capacitors, resistors, transistors, whatever. It's not software making the sound, it's just, good old fashioned electronics.
Noise being filtered.
What's
Yeah,
that distinction? I mean, what distinction is that one? That's based in
analog.
That's okay. Well, okay, I missed that. I'm sorry. Yes, of course.
Yeah, no worries. So we're not talking about software, and I just to put this out there, I'm not saying it in a snobby fashion, but I personally don't use software. Everything I do is made with hardware, and it's a personal
There's
choice.
a
Right.
difference.
Not only could I tell that in the music that I've listened to that you do, but I could absolutely tell that in the personality that you present. You're very authentic, and you came at this from a very ground level up before a lot of that stuff was really going on as far as soft synth and stuff. And you're really enamored in the parts of the machine and how those things work in concert, almost as a composer would be with violins and cellos and that sort of thing working in concert. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but to counter that, you look at somebody like Hans Zimmer, you know what I mean, who's you listen to his scores, and he's clearly
Gorgeous stuff.
yeah. Right, but he's using soft synths. You know what I mean?
Oh,
Listen
yeah.
to somebody like
Yeah.
Charlie Clouser. You know what I mean? He's also a fantastic composer. And a lot of what Charlie Clouser is using is symphonic libraries. In 2019, it's nearly impossible for a score composer who traditionally would go, oh yeah, let's go rent out Todd A.O. Studios in Hollywood and get a 140 piece orchestra and sit there and score Titanic or whatever. Yeah,
Right.
That's not happening anymore.
Not
I mean? What you've got is guys who are like, because of the deadlines they're on, and because of the, just because of, just the technical limitations of that.
Well, and it's progressed to a point where it's acceptable. Obviously, it's acceptable enough because that's what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And I watched some of that Hans Zimmer master class where, and the keyboard he was using was like the weirdest looking thing I've ever seen. It's like, what the hell? Like the keys were like super thick. Like the key, most keyboards are only like 2 inches, the white part. And these keys had like these like 6-inch, and it seemed to be that it gave much more of a intensity based on the distance that the key was pushed down. But I was watching it. I don't know. You guys are talking about keyboards. I'm trying to interject and be relevant. And let me shut up now and get out of the way. Go ahead.
No, it's totally fine. But like where I'm trying to go with that is that I don't feel, again, I'm talking about, I'm just clarifying that I don't use software, and it's just a talking point. It's a personal choice. My brain, I work well with things that I can just like pick it up. Like right now I'm sitting in my studio and I'm looking around and I'm like surrounded by keyboard instruments. You know what I mean? I've got 42 at last count synthesizers.
and that feels
it's a
good.
Problem.
Yeah, it's fine.
It feels oppressive.
No, it doesn't feel oppressive.
I mean, I'm running out of room. This is like I'm getting to the point where I'm going, all right, we gotta deal with this issue here. But
what's your favorite?
Because don't ask me to answer that question.
Which
I
of
will
his
answer
kids,
it.
which of his children is his favorite?
I'm just curious.
That's what you're asking.
I'm just curious because isn't that the essence of what you're saying though? The machines almost have personalities, right?
They absolutely do.
So
they absolutely do.
I mean, and let me clarify. What is your favorite when you set out to create like an EDM sort of a track?
Well, I don't make EDM.
Well, okay.
So,
then how about an ambient track then?
I spend a lot of time, and this is going to really land the plane to your question about like whether there's a specific piece of gear that was a paradigm shifting piece of gear.
Okay.
And it's absolutely the modular synthesizer. To very briefly sum up that previous conversation,
right.
I walked into 3-Wave Music. I played the Prophet 08 thinking I was going to leave there with it. And I was like, man, this really doesn't do anything that I don't already have, because I already had like an Access virus, I already had a Waldorf Q, I already had a Novation Supernova, which at the time were the three major virtual analog, digital, but with a lot of the features that an analog synthesizer has. I already had all that, and it didn't seem like it trod on any new ground. It wasn't disruptive. It wasn't inspiring to me in the way that I thought it would be. And I walked out going, damn, dude, I was about to drop, $2,000 on this instrument, thinking that it was going to be this super inspiring thing. And instead I said, all right, maybe I ought to, start looking at, this modular thing. And then it sort of happened that through, you'll love this one, more synchronicity from knowing people from being on tour or whatever. I happened to get connected through, a couple of people, and it turns out that Alessandro Cortini from Nine Inch Nails was selling off some of his modular stuff. So that happened.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And so I was like, well, I need to start building a system. I need some oscillators. Alessandro was selling some oscillators. We got put in touch with one another. It was hey, look, you're cool. You're cool. Talk to one another, keep me out of it kind of a thing. And so Alessandro and I had a couple of, it was just an introduction, you know what I mean? And he's a super nice guy, and his influence is very palpable in the direction I took,
Right.
musically, just because of what he's doing. I mean, I like Nine Inch Nails. I'm never going to make a bone about that. They're one of my favorite bands, but like, I find musical inspiration more in what Alessandro Cortini is doing as a solo artist. And I'm going to go ahead and plug, he's got a new record out called, I think it's, actually, I don't remember exactly the name of the new Volume Maximo or something like that. It's brand new. They just announced it like 2 or 3 days ago. So like,
Okay.
Volume Massimo,
Huh.
which, because it's Italian. But he's had a string of independent solo records that are all really good. Some of them so centered around things like the Buchla music easel. Some of them centered around various single instruments, and that was the compositional constraint of them. And I mean, it's beautiful. It's super great music. It sounds really nothing like Nine Inch Nails. It's very emotional. It's very raw. It's very it's very inspiring, and it's minimal. It's extremely emotional music. It's very,
Ni- Nine Inch
you can really
Nails.
catch on to.
Nine Inch Nails is very much a reference point, isn't it?
Sure.
Yeah, it's something. Now that I know you go back to that a lot, but that seems to be a reference point that a lot of people can connect with somehow, isn't it? Yeah.
It's a very easy cultural touchstone to be like, for anyone who's not familiar with
Right.
any of this nonsense that I've been babbling about for, what feels like an hour, at least people know who Nine Inch Nails is.
Right.
You can't, you can't exist in 2019. I mean, dude, Old Town Road.
Yeah.
You can't, Trent Reznor it just got nominated for a country music award for Old Town Road because young Keo, who produced Old Town Road for Lil Nas X, sampled inadvertently, without permission initially, sampled a Nine Inch Nails tune, and it made it into the final record. And then it turns out that, Nine Inch Nails found out about it, and they're like, hey, look, we're not going to sue you, but like, look, can you at least throw us on for a songwriting credit here?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so as a result of that songwriting credit, now they're nominated for, an award at the Country Music
Like,
Awards. And
it's an artist that's so good that he accidentally wins an award for a genre he doesn't write.
I tell you, when I found out that
Right?
when I found out
awesome.
Nine Inch Nails came out on Death Row Records, right? Because he worked with. I'm sorry, no, they were both managed. Jimmy Iovine.
Jim. Well,
right?
the way that happened was
And they were on the
when
same label
Trent-
at some point with Dr. Dre and shit, right?
Yeah,
and it was
Interscope.
like, whoa, right, Interscope.
Interscope.
That was where
yeah,
it
they had
happened.
the same
yeah.
parent label.
Yeah.
Trent had just was trying to extricate himself from the contract with TVT Records, and Jimmy Iovine basically bought that out and said, all right, here, Trent, we're going to give you a shell label called Nothing, and you're just going to basically live in that shell. We're going to tell you, all right, do your thing. Trent's going to, give you a completed record at the end. Here's the album. Here's the artwork. Here's the videos. Here's everything. Just leave me the hell alone and let me make what I want to make.
Right.
You guys put it out. And it was kind of the same thing with Death Row. And Death Row had, all that entire crew, which were also making incredible, controversial, engaging. I keep coming back to the word disruptive, but they were really doing disruptive things at a different aspect of the music industry.
Yeah.
But we're clearly talking about the Defiant ones here. You know what I mean? If someone wants to go on HBO and watch the special,
so good,
the Defiant ones, it's amazing.
Yeah,
and it's all about how that happened.
It's such a great. If you haven't seen it, yeah, right. If you're listening, you haven't seen that. It is really good because I didn't know any of that stuff, like how that all transpired.
Of course, now Hasbro has them, right?
Well, that's what I was going to bring up next. I don't know if the last show we did, we just found out that through acquisitions, Hasbro now owns Death Row Records
and their back catalog.
It's crazy. Like, what world do we live in where that is a possibility?
Apparently that was just because it was like a couple of shell corporations, like the media conglomerate that that owned Death Row was also the media conglomerate that owned stuff like Peppa Pig.
Yeah.
And so Hasbro wanted to own Peppa Pig, and they're like, okay, we're going to buy this IP. Oh, you guys own Snoop Dogg and Death Row Records and Dr. Dre and the West Coast hip hop, I
keep imagining a miniatures game developing somehow.
Where like Dr. Dre, you can play Dr. Dre versus Eminem on the same board, because it's Hasbro.
Like Warhammer 40K.
Yeah,
and you get
exactly.
I
said that at the last episode. That's exactly as
Tupac, Biggie.
Yeah.
I'm not saying this to be disrespectful in any way. I'm really not trying to say that, but it's the ludicrousness of the fact that these two companies these two things are connected this way.
It's hard to
I just can't get my mind around it, so I just default to sarcasm. Like
it's like that William Shatner Christmas album.
When you follow the ecosystems of corporate America back to who owns who, first of all, the top level is really small.
Yeah.
It's, you could listen to people talk all day about how corporate America is, we don't have to go there, but everyone is quite well aware of it at this point, the influence that corporate America has. And
nobody's hiding it anymore. No one's hiding it anymore. it just is what it is. It's flagrant now.
And when you think about who owns who, it all comes down to like two or three big, conglomerates that own things like record labels, and they also ever since we busted up all the antitrust laws that were kind of put there to keep this from happening, now you've got this if you look at the vertical integration of entire industries, you look at, okay, so the record company is also owned by the company that owns the radio station that also owns the media that prints the magazines that review this stuff. Well, holy crap, no wonder we're listening to the same 10 songs on pop radio. Everybody's got skin in the game because they're all owned by the same dude.
When Beyonce dropped that album that she put out on iTunes with no promotion, no label, right? No nothing. Well, it would have been with her husband, Jay-Z, right? Whatever label they have. But when that came out, it was, and I think Taylor Swift is doing the same thing now. It's like game changer now with the way that the artist has been re-empowered in this whole dynamic again. Not to go again, not to take you down another wormhole, man, but we got nothing but hard drive, so we can keep going.
I can tell you my Beyonce story.
Yeah, hit me.
Again, lighting guy. I was working for a company that had a fantastic opportunity back when President Obama first got elected. They had a couple of events happening in the DC area around the first inauguration, and Jay-Z was asked by the Obama campaign to do a couple of celebratory private engagements, and we did a show with Jay-Z and friends, and it was Jay-Z, Beyonce, Mary J. Blige, Young Jeezy, and a bunch of these cats at two locations in DC, and I mean, I was just care and feeding of moving lights. You know what I mean? So like my whole job was, take it out of the truck. Well, first of all, put it on the truck, and then, get it down there, get it up in the air, wire it all, make it work, and hand it over to the actual person who was running the show for the band. And just basically care and feeding, keep it running, keep it moving, make sure nothing breaks. If something does break, make sure the audience doesn't know about it. And, that's a lot of my gig, is just, keep it working, make sure the audience never knows about all the crazy gum and chewing gum and duct tape that's on the back of the scenery holding
That's
it all
right.
together.
Yeah. It's funny how many shows are bubble gum and duct tape together.
Buddy.
People don't really realize it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So here I am. This is, it's the inauguration. So it's in January. It's in DC. So it's, it's the Northeast. So it's cold. I've got, at the time I was rocking my punk as hell, original Alpha Flight, MA1 black flight jacket, which it's great because that's a garment that like, it doesn't code any specific way anymore. You could be like, oh, you're into punk. Oh, you're into metal. Oh, you're into hip hop. You got a flight jacket,
Yeah.
An MA1 flight jacket is like this.
It's like a neutral garment.
Yeah. Everybody can roll, and I've got, my punk pins on it with my New Model Army pins and my Sisters of Mercy pins and all this kind of old school crap on it. But at the time I was still smoking cigarettes. It's a bad habit I've since quit, but I was like, hey, I've got a moment. I'm going to go grab my smokes out of my coat, which was sitting on a road case. And I'm going to go outside. I'm going to burn one, come back inside and get back to my gig. So I go to grab my coat and I approach this, group of road cases. Now, keep in mind, this is a presidential engagement. And when you deal with that kind of stuff, there's a lot of protocol about road cases and where they can get stored.
Security
because
is huge. Yeah.
Exactly. So I had all my cases consolidated into one area. And I walk up to where my cases are, and there's this group of people standing around, just kind of, yakking, having a good time, conversating and whatever. And I'm like, oh man, I got to get my jacket, but there's somebody sitting on it.
It's Beyonce.
It's
Beyonce. Oh my God.
Sitting on my jacket. And I'm just like, excuse me.
The queen.
Sorry. Yeah, exactly. Like as meekly as possible. I'm like, pardon me, ma'am. Can I get my jacket, please? Oh, so sorry. Here you go. I'm like, and quietly, I'm like, I'm never gonna wash this jacket again.
Yeah, it's going under glass and never be touched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was great. She was super cool. Their entire crew was super cool. It was a great event. It was a fantastic event to be a part of. But so there's my story, and I've got tons about all these people. So everybody you think would be cool is actually pretty damn cool.
You would think, right? They're just people. But isn't it funny how the way to relate to these folks isn't through their product, it's through what they use to make their product. Like you've connected with a lot of these people because you've connected with them on a technical level with the musicianship, with the instrumentation, and all of this kind of stuff, right? And so it's not a fandom type thing in the sense that it's different. It's a different
not
level.
At all. Yeah. It's more of a gearhead thing,
right?
And it's not, and it never has been for me. And like, that's why I feel awkward talking about, oh yeah, I have this from this person. It's like, I'm not trying to like, I feel as if I'm kind of like, I'm not trying to name drop. It's only for contextualization. It's like, yeah, and I happened to be here, and this is where I was when this happened. And, it's just, it sure makes a great story, but
yeah. And I think too that like there's a certain amount of that these things are special items and too because they have histories to them, so like it's part of that spiritual process of making music.
Yeah.
To know that your gear is comprised up of these different events in your life and these people that you've talked with and met and been able to express things. Yeah, I mean I think that's really neat. I mean.
Definitely.
You would never get that out of soft synths, right?
Exactly. And that, that really kind of brings it back around to like, I use hardware and I have a lot of vintage synthesizers and I've got a lot of things that, like I've got, I've just been restoring a few synthesizers that, yeah, they've got a couple of nicks and dings in them. They're not museum quality pieces, but I don't want them to be. I don't want, like even when I have my tech, Allison, work on some of these vintage instruments, I'm not into, oh, well, it can only have original parts in it. It's like if a modern equivalent exists that sounds functionally identical, use that. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah,
mean? Because
power
this
supplies are
synthesizer's
power
already,
supplies and shit like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
a transistor is a transistor, and why do I want to pay $40 for one obsolete component when I can get one off the shelf that
Right.
does the exact? And when you put it on a scope, it's the exact same
Same
thing, and you
waveform. Yeah.
meter it exactly.
Yeah.
There's no functional reason to sit here and hobble myself to, like that's cork sniffing, and I am not about cork sniffing. You know what I mean? That's gatekeeping. Can I say bullshit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is
absolutely.
gatekeeping bullshit. You
There
know what
are
I mean?
no-
Like I don't want any of that.
Well,
Like in anything. And that's why I try to stress that my decision to use hardware is not some cork sniffing nonsense. I don't think any less of people that use, I've got friends that make records that are 100% synthesizers that are software based.
Right.
It's
Yep.
all on a laptop, and it's great.
It's
It's great
just so
music. You know what I mean?
attainable.
Yeah.
It's so easy
Exactly.
to get to.
Yeah, but that's the difference between being a listener and being the person that produces and channels the music too. I think, like, I don't think you would be happy using that kind of a thing, and I don't think that would be good for your music writing experience.
For me personally, it didn't work. I didn't find very much inspiration in
I struggle with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
like coming up and clicking a mouse on a screen and being like, all right now I've got my mouse pointer over this section of the graphical user interface that's
Yeah.
designed to represent a knob.
Gooey.
Well, why am I clicking on a picture of a knob here?
When I could do,
And dra-
yeah. When I could
Yeah.
just use an analog device and touch
Right.
the knob,
Sure.
kind of thing.
Like why are we, it's like even like look at your cell phone, right? Like look at your mobile phone and look at this thing. Like we have these icons that are holdovers from physical devices. Like when you look at the hang up button, like you're not
It's true.
hanging anything up.
No.
You're not
Yeah.
dialing anything. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when you think about, oh, I'm going to dial a number. Well, there's no friggin' dial there.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like
a 9-year-old today has no context for the reference of
Yeah.
when we used to have corded phones that we hung up on a receiver.
And
Man,
precisely.
I have a house that I bought or that I'm in that that when I got it, it had phones that were still in the walls. They're not connected to anything, but they're just still
Yeah.
on the walls down in the the basement bar,
Sure.
area. And my kids coming and they're rotary phones and looking at these things and being completely perplexed by them. It was such a trip to watch them go, man, holy cow. Like they don't have a frame of reference of why that little receiver with the down arrow has that icon. Like
Yeah.
hang up, what is that? It should just be disconnect, right? Because
Yep,
that would be more.
exactly.
It'd be more accurate. It's like Facebook friends.
Yeah.
No, they're not. That's not a friend.
We're hanging on to these, antiquated,
Yeah, big time.
obsoleted terms, like DJ.
Yeah,
like,
who
what
spins
is a DJ?
discs anymore?
Yeah, you're not Jing any Ds. There's no
No.
jocking of discs, happening. Like you're nowadays,
You're a
even
track
really
clicker.
good DJs. Exactly. And I'm that again. I am not a shit talker. I'm not
Right.
trying to minimize what DJs do. I personally have been a DJ professionally for a while. I like what DJs do.
Yeah, dig
But
it. Yeah,
at this point, with the progression of that art form, with exception, obviously there's clear exceptions to people who actually actively engage in turntablism that are still using things like Serato,
which is a very analog approach to electric music. It's still very
Sure.
analog. Yeah, big time.
it's very visceral, and that's, I think there's a lot to be said for it.
That kid
But-
that was, did you see, I mean, not to, again, another wormhole, but there was, I can't think of what his name is, that was on the Australian Voice that used a bunch of different sampling techniques live. He would do it live and would create like in full instrumentation.
Oh, like people looping?
Yeah, he would loop stuff, but he would use his voice to make the loop. And he would make all the instrumentation. He would beatbox. He would build his own, like live right in front of you. And I looked at that and I went, that's electronic music, but it's not.
There is.
But it
No,
is, it is.
Yeah.
It just is. There's a technology, even though he's using his voice to create the tracks on the fly, it's still the thing that enables him to do that is the hardware, is that particular type. So those loopers have created their own genre now of subset of music entirely because of the ability to do this electronically and the way we can do it now. But you must
And you've
remember
got-
the old days when we used tapes and you had like, you know, your
Sure.
loops and stuff and you would record them and
It sucked. It
Oh
was
my
horrible.
God. It had to get everything just right so it would loop right without a click. I mean, there was all, oh man.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, it was
You know,
horrible.
but now you've got guys that have made an entire, Reggie Watts and Beardy Man and these guys
Yeah.
that, they basically just make music using loopers. You've got, and other people who are taking like Unwoman in San Francisco. She's a classical cellist, but that uses the cello with a looping pedal to do things like, she'll start a track out with percussion, with just, slapping the bow across the strings or thumping the body of the cello and creating a rhythmical foundation like that. And then, doing building harmonies in real time. And like to touch briefly on, things like electronic music, like anybody, and this is going to be me kind of with my finger in my nose going, "Nyeh, nyeh, 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 nyeh," but like anybody that has anything bad to say about electronic music right now is kind of full of crap because
Well, they don't
this
understand it. They don't understand it. Yeah.
Think about this. How are you consuming music right now? We're listening on laptops. We're listening on phones. It's all electronified in some way. You're not listening on a damn wax cylinder. This isn't analog anymore. It's all electronic in some way. Even rock music, even the most purest metal music, or well, I must only die for true metal. It's like, dude, you're playing a guitar through a guitar pedal, through an electric amplifier that's being fed into, that's being recorded using a microphone, that's going into an analog to digital interface, that's being connected to a computer that's running Pro Tools or whatever, that's going to take that music and digitize it. And then you're going to process it with a bunch of effects, and then you're going to print it on, well, here I am dating myself, but I was going to say you're going to print it on a CD.
Yeah.
But what's,
who even bothers with that anymore?
Yeah.
How old are you?
Yeah.
How old are you?
I mean, I do. I mean, I would say a great portion of my record sales are all physical media. It's very reassuring. There's a big, I've got a CD that's about to release on September 3rd. And my previous 2 physical media CD releases have sold out. There is still an audience for physical media, and I think a lot of musicians are finding that there is still an audience for physical media, especially if you can make something that is distinctive. You know what I mean? Like, I personalize all my releases. I will number them.
There's a really cool way about sharing stuff that way too.
Yeah.
There was something about handing out, hey, I'll swap you that. Remember it started with cassette swaps and stuff. Well, and Eric asked the question though, but so we get an idea. How old are you? Like, what genre of music it puts you into?
If you wish to reveal something.
Yeah, you don't have to.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll be blatant about it. I'm 42 years old.
All right, so you're right. I mean?
Like,
he's right in the wheelhouse with us.
I'm Generation X, baby.
I don't know. I'm 49, almost 50. I'll be 50 November 1st.
Yeah, 47.
Listen, old man.
I know.
Get
right?
off my lawn. No, but it puts me in this spot where to again talk about getting back to the conversation about music making technology. When I first learned, there was no software. And even when I first learned how to DJ, it wasn't digital. It was, you took 2 records and slammed them on a pair of, Techniques 1200 turntables, and you had a mixer, and that's how you did it.
And you marked them with a crayon, right? We learned that, like, to find your
Sharpie.
spot, or Sharpie.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
or
you knew where
pieces
you were.
of tape or whatever. Yeah, but I mean, that's how it happened.
Guys pulled that off, and then we do it live, and then switch tracks and switch beats and switch records. I mean, that was an art, man. When you look at what went into doing that shit, it's like, whoa.
Utterly incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, and anybody that has anything bad to say about that, that's not making music. I mean, okay, tell you what, why don't you do it?
Yeah, if it's so easy, you fucking do it, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
why don't you go ahead and stand in front of these 2 turntables and do what that guy that you say is talentless just did?
Yeah, spin a beat.
Why don't you do?
Yeah, for 10 minutes nonstop without breaking the beat, so people can dance to it and rap over it and stuff.
To me, all sound is music.
Yeah.
I guess it all.
I'm excited about the album too. I really am.
Yeah. So, like that, to kind of bring it back to, what was the paradigm shift in the music? It was the modular synthesizer.
Yeah.
That's
And
cool.
it was inspiring
skeleton
because,
key. Yeah, it opened the door
yeah,
for you. Yep.
I now had the thing that made it more than anything else become a tool. Again, I may sound, pretentious or whatever, but like it was an opportunity to really find my own individual voice, because here's an instrument that you're not buying off of a shelf. It's not a manufacturer or a product developer's idea of what this instrument should be. When you buy a modular synthesizer, you buy the box, the enclosure, the shell. That by itself is several $100s, and it's just an empty box. And then you buy component by component, you fill it. And so it's just like assembling I'm not really a fantasy football guy, but like it's like assembling your fantasy
Right.
football team. Well, who would you want? You know
Yep.
what I mean? Like
Yep.
this is, creating a PC group. You know what I mean? For a tabletop gaming session. You know what I mean? Like, what do
For
you want?
years, yeah, it's for years in guitar, all the effects were modular effects. They were pedals, but for
Sure.
all intents and purposes, so the case was
Exactly.
the board you just dropped them all into and plugged them together
Yep.
with, right? So
Exactly.
we just yeah. So again, not anything really. This is just a different interpretation of the sort of the same idea, and the analog instrument being the keyboard that
Yep.
you use. So that's just your meat. So you could walk up to one
Well,
of these and plug a guitar into them too. I'm sure,
well, yeah,
probably
you
right.
can, but I do want to correct one misconception. Is you said keyboard. You
Okay.
don't need a keyboard. That's the paradigm shift that happened.
Oh. Okay.
Now,
Oh. Okay.
This is
yeah,
more sound manipulation,
This is sound
experimentation.
engineering. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
not even. I mean, this is, you don't, and this is something to get into, from a philosophical perspective. When a while ago you mentioned Morton Subotnick, and I'm
Yes.
going to come back to that note.
Okay.
Where a guy like Morton Subotnick was working with instruments that were designed by Don Buchla. And Don Buchla was the West Coast equivalent of Dr. Bob Moog.
Right. Right.
Moog was on the East Coast making synthesizers that had keyboards attached to
those
them.
are world renowned.
Right. Yeah.
Like Pink Floyd
Well,
used them.
so
Everybody used them, right? I mean,
yeah,
it was
well, yeah, and they are well regarded as an archetype of a synthesizer. But also, there's a lot of attention that needs to be paid to what Don Buchla and Serge Cherepnin were doing with different paradigms for interfacing with the instrument. Whereas the Moog cats had a philosophy of, all right, we've got this sound generation tool, but how do we get musicians interested in playing it? Well, we should make it so that way it interfaces with a traditional seeming black and white keyboard. And so that made it accessible to, they got together with Wendy Carlos, who, took and made Switched on Bach
Yep.
with it.
Yep.
And,
And the
made
well-tempered
something.
synthesizer.
Exactly. It was a way to take this weird, Forbidden Planet kind of noise making machine that no one could really pigeonhole and go, okay, this is
westernize it
what it's
on
for.
typical scales.
Exactly.
Which
And
is
so what
actually
you
also a constraint as well as a way of opening it up as accessibility.
There you go. So now you're already taking this thing that shouldn't necessarily have constraints applied to it, and you're putting constraints on it. You're telling me how
Yep.
I can use it.
Yep.
Whereas Buchla was like, well, we have these non-traditional interfaces, and that's something that I became interested in.
That's really
Was
interesting.
you've got the ability to use ribbon controllers and tactile controllers that aren't necessarily a black and white keyboard with chromatic notes on them that ascend do 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 like that.
Yeah.
You can make this note be, whatever frequency you want it to be, and the key adjacent to it doesn't have to have any relation to it.
You have infinite variability within the range, the audible range.
Sure.
Basically is what you end up with. So a truly analog instrument.
Some of them have
really.
like joysticks.
Yeah, I get. Yeah, precisely. Joysticks, XY pads, all these
That's
things.
right.
And now you're starting to see
phase shift and all that, right?
Yeah, and there's just different ways of interacting with the instrument. Like you talked about a joystick. If you go back and look, and you also earlier you mentioned Pink Floyd. You can look at Pink Floyd live at Pompeii.
Yep.
And there's a whole section where Roger Waters is doodling around on this synthesizer. It's called EMS Synthy. And it's this, little briefcase little synthesizer that's, the Synthy and the VCS3 by EMS, they had this little pin matrix. So instead of cables, you had a little XY matrix of pins. So if you wanted to connect,
it's like a light bright or something.
Yeah, exactly, precisely, or Battleship.
Like, one of those.
You've got these little pins you drop in a grid, and if you want to connect this input to that output, you just find where they intersect on the XY grid, and you drop a pin in there.
Oh, I seen what's his name, Jarre. Oh crap!
Yep. Jean-Michel Jarre.
Yeah, him using those before too.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of cats that have those. They're really, on the secondhand market, they're really expensive. They're actually still made, but the waiting list is like multiple years, and you're looking at like, the problem is to make it the way it's supposed to be. The case that they put it in is hard to find. The plastic that the case is made from apparently is, you can't find them. So the waiting list is exceptionally long, and they're like between $25,000 to $30,000.
Wow.
And it's just like, it's ridiculous. Woo. But with modular, now you've got this freedom from, all right, this instrument isn't telling me what I want it to do anymore. And even my first EP, Separation Anxiety, it was produced kind of equally with synthesizers that have black and white keys on them, but a lot of the sound generation was being done by the modular synthesizer, and there's a strong piano component to it, because piano is something I always kind of come back to as an anchor to lend some organic or natural feel, or some kind of frame
something
of
has
reference.
to set your key, right? I mean, you still play and compose within key, or not at all?
I do.
Okay.
But you don't have to.
No, of course you wouldn't have to.
It has to be tonal. No. But this is leading me into how it shifted how I write.
I was going to say, we're about to go into some theory and philosophy of music composition.
And I was going to ask you what your workflow was in general, like if you started off with rhythm and then melody, or if it was dependent upon mood, or what.
Some of it came out of nowadays it's definitely got a different starting point, where and again, getting back to that thing where I said this is where I put my drum machines in the corner and made them think about what they had done previously. When I was making rhythmically based music, right, I would sit there in front of a drum machine, and the first thing I would do is I would go up to the drum machine and I would put in 4 kick drums. Do, 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 do. And so every damn song I made had this, my friend Tom refers to it as, pogo stick music, where it's just 4 on the floor, thudding kick drum on the 1, 2, 3, 4. I unintentionally pigeonholed myself. Exactly. And it all had that rhythm, and it was kind of like, all right, no wonder it sounds homogeneous, and I'm not really feeling terribly inspired by it.
Right. It's so very common. Yeah.
By divorcing myself from that entirely and starting from a different starting point, it was a opportunity to completely open up what my experience with music was. And so here I was going with the first album. I hadn't quite developed the confidence and the courage really to drop my pants and just be like, okay,
hang it all out there.
Hang it all out there and be like, here's my dirty underwear, here's my dirty laundry spread across the clothesline. Everybody have a look at it.
Now by that, do you mean you just didn't feel as free to express yourself in your first album?
I didn't know what, it's kind of like when you develop as an emotional being, right? When you first, you're a teenager, you're a young adult, and you think you think you know what you
Okay.
want out of a
I got you.
relationship,
Yeah.
you know, and then finally, you know, as you mature
Finally,
as
you're
an
more
adult,
seasoned, and then
yeah, and you learn through making
Had your
mistakes.
heart broke 3 or 4 times,
Sure.
lost half
Or
your
you
shit.
break someone's heart. You know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah.
Like, you know, you got to take some ownership of that, and you go, all right, I fucked that up. Here's how I
Yeah.
won't do that again in the future. And this is, you know, I have to be more willing to acknowledge these failures in my personality,
Right.
and let's move on from that
Own
and
it.
develop as a person. Exactly. You got to own it. You got to move on from it and be cognizant never to repeat those mistakes again, because you're just going to be a carousel going around and around making the same mistakes over and over again.
Right.
So here I am coming at it from a different perspective, you know, of just, all right, now I've got this box that has all these different sound generation capabilities, and I've built it myself out of individual components, and doing a lot of research and listening to a lot of, you know, sample sounds and bouncing ideas off of a lot of people, and, you know, being a part of certain, you know, online forums in which people, you know, you want to talk about being able to interact with musicians I respect on a fundamental level that, you know, involves not, oh man, I really love your music, but it's like, you know, these cats, they are on these forums. They're there less now, because that entire, you know, community of modular synthesis has really kind of blown up over the last, let's say, 10 years.
Hmm.
And so those guys are way more in the background than they have been, you know.
Yeah, it's
But like
probably
when
overwhelming. Yeah,
when I
dude,
first
yeah.
landed there, I'm sitting there and I'm on comment threads on some of these forums with, you know, again, Alessandro Cortini from Nine Inch Nails was there talking about this stuff, you know, and just and the manufacturers themselves are there talking about it, you know.
yeah.
um you know, cats from bands that I know, you know, that you would recognize are there, you know. And it was mainly because we're all just gearheads. We're not there to sit there and, you know, stroke each other over the platinum records and the, oh my gosh, you're such a rock star. This is like, no man, I'm a sound designer, you're a sound designer, and we're trying to solve a problem here. It's like if you're a coder and you're on like Stack Exchange or something like that, you're not sitting there being like, oh, you work for Microsoft. You know, it's like, dude, I'm trying to solve a particular programming problem here. Can you help a brother out? You
Yeah.
know, and, you know, or hey, I'm looking for a new component that does this thing. I'm looking to kind of get this sort of sound. And people that own those things, they weigh in and they go, oh, I have one of those, I liked it, and here's what I like about it and what I don't like about it. And then you look and see who's commenting, and you click on their name and you're like, oh crap, I just had a conversation with, you know, one of the guys who helped invent the MIDI standard, or
Yeah, it's
whatever. You know what
crazy.
I mean?
Neat.
You're talking to these cats that, like, you know, they have, you know, a pedigree, and you're understanding why you should listen to their words, and you go, okay, there's some weight that I should put behind this.
Yeah, I have
And
had a
it's,
similar but analogous experience, so I definitely identify with
yeah,
what you're saying.
Yeah, these guys, I've heard this too. Like with these guys are mostly music nerds, the ones that have been doing it for any period of time, and that's what they are. Yeah, any fame or any kind of. I heard Taylor Hawkins from Foo Fighters say this one time. Someone asked him what it's like to be a rock star, and he said, "Fuck you, I'm not a rock star. I'm a musician." Like he was like, he just totally rejects the idea of any kind of adulation that way, right?
yeah.
He's like, if
I
you
mean,
want to
that's
respect me as a musician, bitch, but otherwise, piss off. Like, I don't care about that. I want to be known for being really good at what I do, you know, not for, you know, any kind of other sort of fame or stardom associated with it.
that stuff is fleeting. You know what I mean? It's, I mean, not that I know anything about it, because I mean, you know, damn it, man, you know, I still put on my pants one leg at a time. You know, like
Right.
I'm, you know, I've okay, like, you know, like I've I'm at the point now where, like, oh, people are calling me up and asking me to be on their podcast. And oh, I've got a couple of magazine articles. And
Yeah.
oh, my music's being played on the radio. And okay, yeah, I've sold, you know, I'm being asked to play shows. And like, all right, so maybe there's something there. But like at the end of the day, I'm not, you know, Dave Grohl. You know what I mean? I can still go and buy a gallon of milk at the
Yeah, right.
grocery store and
Yeah.
not have someone give me shit
But
about
wouldn't
it.
you
You know?
just prefer it that way anyway? If it never, you know, if you could just be known for the work and everybody just left you alone otherwise, that would be, to me, that would be like ideal,
Well,
right?
yeah, and that's why I'm loath to mention some of these people by name. But you know,
Well, no,
it's like it's
there's an association that needs to be made there for credibility,
yeah,
Bub. You know, when we do our next podcast or whatever, I know that's not going to be happening because we've already established that. But it has to
yeah,
happen to establish that you work in the industry. You've got albums
yeah.
that are out. Like this is something you do professionally. This is what you do, right? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah,
and it sort of it helps people understand kind of where I'm coming from and who I learned from
right.
and what I learned and why I'm doing things the way I am, because like this was the experience I had. You know, these are the people that were formative to me, and
That's
this,
exactly the kind of stuff we want to know. Yeah,
yeah,
that's there's
you know,
there's a common thread always with an artist, and you just got
yeah,
because I don't know that there is. I mean, all art is. Is there any new art? It's all derivative, right? It's all somehow derivative. So there's always going to be that common thread somehow.
sure.
You know,
It's a great saying going around, says all design is theft.
for sure.
You know, to some extent, there's, very few new things happening, but there are, some pre-built building blocks floating around there that you can do some really cool stuff
And
with,
it just gets easier and easier. It really, yeah. You know, Steve Jobs said that. Said the innovations of the future are not going to be massive breakthroughs anymore like we've seen. It's going to be how people take disparate things and put them together in new ways.
Yeah.
That's where
Which,
the revolution is going to happen.
It gets easier and easier to use the things that we're making, but it becomes harder and harder to make something new.
On the topic of what we were talking about earlier with things like promoting things and things coming your way and you making that decision to engage in those things, and a short conversation that we had earlier about how this is kind of like the cusp of you taking the step into that realm for you because you've been a bit maybe insular or sectarian or something. How are you incorporating that aspect in a human-centric way as opposed to the desire to want to express yourself, that dichotomy of wanting to express yourself via music and what you have to do as a person, as a human, to facilitate that and to deal with other personalities on what might be considered an intimate level?
That really boils down to, we're going to talk about the state of the music industry in 2019.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
So put your seatbelts
Let's do
on.
so. Go for it.
Engage.
And I'm going to preface this with, this is not original thought. I'm probably regurgitating some thoughts and words of people who are much more established luminaries, whose best practices and whose insight I tend to take very much to heart and guide me with the decisions I make for how I do what I do.
Right.
But we're in an era now where, because of the state of the music industry and because of the paradigm shifts that social media and the way we consume music as, citizens of the first world, with all of our first world problems and our digital streaming and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
If you had approached this the way we would have even in the 90s, right before the advent of the exponential growth of the internet, you would have people that if you wanted to release a record in 1991, you had to, first of all, have a good amount of money, because you needed to buy whatever. If this was an electronic record, you needed to be able to go buy synthesizers. You needed to buy.
Well, the entry point was way higher back then.
Buddy,
sure.
Absolutely.
It was
you
insane.
needed at least $2,000 to even think about making something that would probably be a crappy record.
Yeah.
Or even just, to, like, even if you're making a rock and roll record, you got to get some drums, a guitar, bass guitar, microphones. You got to go book time out at a studio. You got to be good enough to even be able to get in the door at the studio. And then you would go in there and you would record a demo. I just had this discussion with, another guy in another band, this cat, Stephen Archer, who's one half of a band called Ego Likeness with his wife Donna Lynch, and he's also got a solo project called Stoneburner that's doing really, really well on Negative Gain Productions. And he was talking about, we were having a discussion, and the word demo tape came up, and I said, who the hell even does demo tapes anymore? And the idea was, back in the 90s, you had to like record a recording and hand it out to promoters and hope it got into the hands of someone at a record label who would, out of the entire stack of these cassette tapes that would land on their desk, you'd mail it in, maybe, to a program director at a college radio station. Maybe they would play it and hope that this demo tape, which was a demonstration of your abilities, would land on their desk, and they would listen to it and they would go,
That's how Eminem was discovered. Right.
Yeah.
Right. From that documentary, it was from a demo tape.
And so you had these guys, or, I don't want to use the heteronormative, like term guys. You had these folks whose, job it was to sift through these stacks of recordings, and they were A&R people, artists and repertoire people at a record label when labels were a thing, and they would be the gatekeepers of music to decide who would be, added to the artists and repertoire of that label. And these cats, that would be their job.
They were the gatekeepers, but in a way they were also a filter.
Yeah,
as well.
Absolutely. And they were able to select good from bad. And and then once you got selected and you were like, all right, there is some potential here, whether it was the fact that there were really good songs that were just recorded like poop, or you had really, poor songs that were well recorded, and you're like, man, there's something here. There's a kernel of an idea that can be developed. Then you would get, what they called a development deal, and you would go in, and then the record label would pay for you to go in and, record an album at a studio. The studio would front you the money, and then you would hope to God that, by touring your buns off and the label throwing umpteen hundreds of thousands of promotional dollars at the record, you would sell a few copies.
Or you would go into debt and never come out.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. And think about how many bands, they may have sold records, quote unquote, but they never really made any money. It was because they were upside down, because the label fronted these, millions of dollars. And they're like, you've got these artists that never really saw any money back on it.
If you ever wonder why a beer at a football stadium costs $16, now you understand the record industry. Like that's what they did to these artists. Like everything had triple, quadruple markup. I mean, it was insane when you look at some of the ways that, you come off of a tour, you just sold more albums, you're number one, and you're like, okay, cool, you're off tour, you owe us $200,000.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, what? Most successful tour of the summer, whatever it is, and these artists come in and just, they're shocked. Now, okay, you still owe the label $200,000 for everything we've paid for. You're upside down. I mean, that's got to be. It's just got to. Now you got to do the next album, but it means you got to go into debt even further. You know what this reminds me of is like how the coal miners always ended up in debt to the company store back. And ultimately you became a debt slave is what would ultimately
indentured
happen.
Servitude, my dude. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was all about. And you belonged to the record label.
Dance for us, monkeys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So what you had is, back in the day, you would have, as an artist, you would have these multiple layers of abstraction between you and the public. You could get away with being a personality like Axl Rose, or a personality like Mariah Carey, or, even somebody like Prince, where you have like this mystique and, no one knows too much about you. And the public gets fed these little, crumbs of information about, who is this person? And they've got this mysteriousness to them. And, you have to piece it together, because, you only read, an article that comes out in like Rolling Stone or alternative press.
Yeah.
And you have to kind of like go, oh, I wonder what they're like. And now, you've got,
podcasts,
everybody podcast, or you've got people on Twitter that are like, or Instagram, and you're like, wow, I know what this guy's eating for lunch.
Yeah.
And it's very, very different, And
You're
now
way more connected now to the artist. If they want to be, yeah.
I just literally was down in North Carolina playing a show with another project that I play with, and I had some time in between, arriving there and getting set up to do sound check and stuff like that. And I took a drive around Charlotte, and I went to a couple of local record stores, and I went to a place called Lunchbox Records, and I had an awesome, like, 40-minute conversation with the cat behind the counter, talking about just experiences with, you know, um, you know, being in the music industry in general, and how our interactions with, other musicians go, and talking about, things like, well, here it is. It's right there. It's on Twitter, and um, how that changes the dynamic of, the relationship between artist and audience.
Yes.
How it's no longer I'm up here on, you cannot, for the most part, be a successful a successful artist while you're standing 15 feet above your audience and not coming down
To
to
relate.
be on their level.
Right.
And exactly, and relate.
Yep.
We were talking about how, he had done some touring, I had done some touring, and, a lot of the touring that I've done has been as a technician, as a lighting director or whatever. And, when I've been on tour with a bunch of these bands, one of the big things that's in the industry right now is to do meet and greets. You know what I mean? Where, if you're a band playing a show in whatever city, it doesn't matter the size of the venue, you offer a direct to fan, opportunity to, sell a VIP ticket, which, you not only go to the actual show, but you show up an hour or two early and you get to meet the artist,
Right.
you get to interact with them.
Some of these artists are taking this to like a whole new levels too, with like barbecues, and like you can eat and hang out with the band, and they have like a cookout because they're going to do that anyway before the show.
Yeah.
And they get the fans involved in it now too. It's like a whole, because, okay, so this is a sort of on your point, is that now, don't you think that the live performance piece of this has taken on a much more prominent role, given that the music itself is so easily shared? Right now, now it's become about an experience again. So it, in a sort of way, it's returning to its roots, because that's used to be how it was done, right? You made an album, you toured that album. While you were touring that album, you were writing the next album. And then it was just that was your cycle, album tour. And that was sort of the life of musicians for a long, long time. But now, because you can get it all digitally, I can watch a YouTube video of Roger Waters, like anytime I want. But I still went and seen him in concert, because holy crap, I got to go see him in concert. Like, that experience now becomes so much more of a piece of this puzzle again.
I have a Roger Waters story too, but we'll get there in a minute.
Okay.
But you're totally right, because I mean, even if you want to go back to let's talk about like pushing the Wayback Machine to even predating the record industry.
Like Sun Records before that all kind of
not even
right?
like, but before the idea of buying and selling records existed, how did people experience music?
Live. You had to go see it.
Yeah, exactly. Or, you had to, be present. I mean, even just people sitting around a campfire playing music to one another, or, if you want to talk about like the Renaissance, or, anything like that, you had, salon concerts and people going to somebody's place. And
that's right, because like Little Richard, I think, used to go out and perform as James Brown, because James Brown, like, would get sick and be like, they'd get Little Richard to go on, and the audience didn't have a clue. They didn't know it wasn't him. He could like do all the singing and the dance moves and everything, but James Brown was literally hiring him to go out and play him. This is because he didn't feel like performing. But
that's
no one
something
knew,
of which I was completely unaware.
But that tells you, like, they didn't know that wasn't him, right? They didn't know, because there wasn't the way. You couldn't just go on and look at 10,000 different photos of the person in every possible light angle, right? They just showed up under the marquee, and that was the name, and you went in, and it was the right music. I heard it on the radio, so I saw James Brown. No, you saw Little Richard.
Yeah.
Look, I'm pretty certain of that. I've heard that before, but that tells you like there was a disconnect, and it all like you had to go see these bands,
Right.
but you weren't even necessarily sure that's who you were watching. It's crazy,
Yeah.
right?
Well, hell, the Art of Noise would put masks on when they would perform live or show up for interviews.
Right. And there's other people that have done that, other bands that have done
Yeah,
that kind
well,
of
like
stuff
Kiss
too.
and
Kiss
stuff,
for
yeah.
sure. Yeah. Like
But-
a weird anonymity thing. It builds a mystique.
but really not
Well-
applicable today, I guess.
Sia, SIA. You know what I mean? Like she didn't show her face.
Right.
You know, she's done shows on Saturday Night Live where like, you know, like she's got a wig over her face.
Right.
And she like it was that was the entire thing.
There was
It
another
was supposed to be anonymous.
Lady
Or
Gaga
even-
did that for a long time too, right? She would obscure her face.
Yeah, I mean, I
in the
did lights
beginning.
for Gaga. You know what I mean? I did lights for Gaga at a radio festival where you know it was called Jingle Ball, and it was like everybody that was hot on the radio at the time. She was just basically blowing up with
Poker face.
no, yeah, I think it was Poker Face and Just Dance. You know what I
Okay.
mean? It was before Telephone and Alejandro and all that stuff had really kind of no, I think it was before Poker Face. Um, but anyway, I mean, like I was kind of freaked out because her production manager was like, keep the lights low. You know what I mean? Like, and I was like, really? I'm like, we're in an arena right now, my dude. Like, I've got to have spotlights because, you know, we've got these people sitting in the arena, but like, you know, we've got these people up there in the nosebleeds. They can't see the stage. They're looking at the video screens. And I need to be able to have a spotlight on that talent so that way the camera can pick them up and show. No, she wants it to be like a New York nightclub. You know, it wants it to be like really dark and like into. I'm like, okay. And at the time, my boss walks in, and we were trading off, you know, time on the board. So he wanted to run lights for Flo Rida and Pitbull, who were also on that particular lineup. And I was doing, you know, I did. I think Miranda
Lambert.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And who's the other
Her husband at the time probably would have been. Yeah.
no,
No.
I'm trying to think of oh gosh. Oh well, I completely I sketched on one of the other guys, a little kid known by Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah.
He was on that show. You
Yeah,
know, so
right.
this contextualizes the time in which this happened. I ran lights for Justin Bieber and Lady Gaga at the same show, and they each played for like 10 minutes. You know,
wow. Okay.
yeah, I mean,
It's
it
like
was
an
a radio show.
radio type thing almost. Like-
Precisely, it was iHeartRadio. Yeah, it was that.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like a festival kind of thing. Everybody gets like, you know, 15 minutes or whatever to play their hit, get on the stage, get off the stage, your thing. And me and my boss were trading off running the console because, you know, it was a festival thing. Like nobody was traveling with their own, you know, full on 2-hour Lady Gaga show, full on 2-hour Pussycat Dolls show, or Flo Rida or Pitbull or whatever. So we were just trading off. And my dude was, you know, he went off to go get dinner backstage in catering, and he comes out with this, you know, plate full of barbecue and corn and whatever. And he's like, what the hell are you doing? Why are the lights so dark? And I'm like, dude, don't freak out. They told me to do this.
They told me to.
Yeah, they told me to. And like he looked over at the production manager, and he's like, yeah, man, it's cool. I'm like, I told you. He said it's cool, man. You know, like, but it was definitely like that. And it was, you know, it's like, and you look at, you know, some of the other artists that have done this whole theater of the obscure thing, you know, where they kind of mask themselves.
Yeah.
And I don't even know how we got onto this. Now I've completely lost the thread of the
Well,
conversation.
we were talking about how you were going to deal with being sort of introverted, but now you're kind of on the cusp of being in a wider circle of people and under more scrutiny and dealing with personalities on an intimate level with yourself and that sort of thing.
Because you're having to make this transition of sort of being behind the scenes now, where you're more out. You know, you're putting yourself out there more.
And just how you dealt with that and what you felt about it. So eventually that leads to people who mask themselves in public, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, okay, we could take that tack. I mean, like, and that's a very, I mean, and then when you think of it in context of what I've done, you know, and for whom, you know, like I've spent a great amount of my career out at the front of house consoles. You know what I mean? I've been the people that the
Right.
audience is looking past. If they notice me, I have done my job poorly.
Yeah,
You know
right.
what I mean? Like, I should fade into the background. I should just be another technician whose job is to make sure that everyone's eyes stay on that stage.
But I mean, in the
And-
future, I mean, as things progress in the
Oh,
future,
yeah.
if they progress in a logical way where you continue to get more success and more
Oh, yeah.
notoriety
Well,
and
yeah.
more connections, like, and you come
Yeah.
out, I mean, like, are you prepared to
Well,
have?
I'm going there.
Okay.
Like, so I've got to take that mindset of, having traditionally thought of myself as, a person who has to be,
Transparent.
practically transparent and
Yep.
invisible, and flip that to now I'm on the stage, but I still don't have that lead guitar mentality where I want to be out in front.
Right.
Like, I found that, thankfully, doing the style of music that I'm doing, which is more, to put a very broad category on it, ambient, ambient electronic music, is not in any way, shape, or form pop music. It's not centered around personality. It's not centered around, it's not very, it's not even really very lyrical. So there's not a lot of emotional connection to the performer so much as there is some sort of abstract emotional connection to the music itself.
Right.
I like that, because I always struggled with the idea of, man, I got to come up with lyrics.
Mm.
Right.
I got to come up with words that people can sing. I don't know. I suck at that. Like, I have a lot of complex emotions, but I don't process them that same way. I am not
Hard to distill them down into the right words.
Well, Pink Floyd handled that with the light show. They turned.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically couldn't see them on the stage. It was all about that light show.
Yeah. And so I've found, just like I don't enjoy, going to a museum. And again, this is just a personal experience. I'm not trying to dictate how anyone else should appreciate art, but I find my ability to enjoy art is much greater when I'm able to look at an abstract piece of sculpture or an abstract piece of art and kind of appreciate it for what it is without, and now if you follow the thread of this conversation back and we talk about how I approach synthesizers, and
Right.
I'm like, I don't like this thing to tell me how to use it.
Mm.
It's like that. I don't want to tell anyone listening to my music
What
it's
is.
about.
Right.
Fuck that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
I shouldn't have to hand everybody, like a synopsis of, and I mean this in the most audience centric way possible. I don't want to tell you what you should feel right now.
Right.
Or the way you should interpret it, or how it
Right.
should resonate with you.
You'd rather
It's
invoke
like-
emotions and not force emotions.
Right. It's like, do we watch TV? I mean, think about the TV that, we're of a certain age, right? When we watched TV that had a laugh track.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very.
To
Yeah.
tell
derivative.
us when we thought, when the people writing the show thought that we
should laugh.
think that it's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's the punchline. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. Now, we've got, TV shows where you're like, crap, man, that was dark. Should I be laughing right now?
Yeah.
Like, you're like, whew, man, that just went to a really dark place. I mean, it is kind of funny because there's like this some situational irony here, but like, whew, man, I don't know. But that level of self-awareness is a different way to experience that story. Is
Right.
going, you're kind of taking yourself out of the narrative for a minute and going, man, why did I just find that funny?
It's
You
the
know?
difference sort of between, it's the same kind of energy where people come from when they say, well, the book is better. Well, the book is better because that story played out in your mind's interpretation of it. And now someone made a movie and put faces on characters that don't line up with anything you imagined or whatever, right? So
Absolutely.
it's that same space sort of artistically.
And who wants to be like,
A lot of people love the
wants to
Harry
be
Potter
told?
movies, man. They love having that shit spoon fed to them too. That's the problem, right? But so what you're talking about is a higher sort of understanding or appreciation of how you view and connect with music. That's a little different
also,
than. Go ahead.
Yeah, and also not talking down to the audience. You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
and also not trying to presume that they don't know what they like. You know what I mean? And I've found a greater amount of success as an artist in talking to people who I, have some level of familiarity with, but you know, when I first put all my music is instrumental. You know what I mean? It doesn't have any words. I occasionally struggle with titles for things, because it's like, all right, I can't go the Autechre or the Aphex Twin route of just naming a song a string of unrelated numbers and letters.
Yeah, it's a little
Which, I
strange.
mean, they can do that, but I am not them. I'm not nearly that good. But the idea of talking to someone and being like, all right, well, what did you experience listening to this music? What did you take away from it? And they're like, well, I had this emotion of blank. Yeah, and I'm not even going to tell you what they thought they felt. But I was like, damn, you kind of really you got it. Like, and I'm thinking to myself, well, fuck, that's a success if I'm able to convey a certain emotion or a certain atmosphere without having to give anyone any textual, verbal, or written cues about what they should be experiencing or
Right.
what was influencing me at that time.
Right.
That's pretty damn good. And that to me is like, all right, I think I'm being effective here.
That's very.
Yeah,
I don't wanna
you're resonating.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very pure way to kind of approach art too. I would think of any kind is to go with it from that mindset. Like I'm not telling you what this is. It's whatever you want it to be, kind of thing.
I mean, you guys are gamers, right?
Oh yeah, we grew up gaming.
Yep.
All right. I mean, like, look at Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah,
like
the ultimate choose your own adventure sort of.
Right.
Right.
there's obviously there's a DM, a dungeon master, who's kind of like crafting the story, but you can play that game with a pencil, paper, and some dice.
And you don't really need the dice. You
Right.
can use chits in a hat.
Yeah.
Sure.
Then, in fact,
know what I mean?
before
Like-
they had dice, they were selling chits that you could cut out of the back of the Holmes Basic set because they didn't have dice to put in there.
Ian, you don't understand. We can go deep. He's Eric can take you deep on D&D.
I did my thesis for my bachelor's in history on the Satanic Panic in first edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Man, I mean, I grew up in the '80s when that whole Satanic Panic
When that
thing
all
was
went
going
down.
on.
Yeah.
So did we.
And watching America Undercover.
Yeah, 60 Minutes and stuff. Yeah, I'll gladly send it to you. You can check it out.
Dude, I mean, that was so real in its fakeness.
Yeah.
It was like, wow.
Yeah.
Like it was really real. The Satanic Panic thing was a real thing, but
Yeah.
I'm sitting there going, are you guys for real?
Right.
Like, you really think this is what's going on?
Yeah.
Like, we're sitting here playing D&D because like we want to imagine that we're characters from we want to play a really complex, very it's again getting back to the whole fantasy football thing.
Yeah.
This is like a weird version of fantasy football, except we're we're Frodo Baggins. You know
Right.
what I mean? Like, this is like we're just doing this with dragons and wyverns and unicorns and,
Well,
and
everybody's-
magical swords and shit.
Everybody's so out of the closet now on it, as so to speak, when it
Yeah.
comes to it. So it does not have near the sort of mystique it had back then. But back then
Yeah.
it was powerful. Like, it was palpable how dangerous this stuff was, and it was. But Eric, pointed it out that because it sort of allowed people to test run in these sort of simulations, like trying different. You could do anything, right? You could try different forms of government. You could try different religions. You could try different. You could, if you were male, you could play a female character, and it allowed people to sort of migrate out of these traditional structures of normalcy and experience things through, mind games, if you will, and be able to. I mean, I think it makes you a more rounded individual because of that, but it did allow you to start questioning things that were considered very important to traditionalists.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And they seen that as a huge threat.
And it's like I lay out two pathways. One was a psychological and one was spiritual. But it's yeah, you should. We did the podcast about it too, actually. So here in a couple of days or over the weekend or something, I'll send you both of those. You'll be interested in reading it, I think.
But anyway, I mean, I digress. Yeah. I mean, that was.
But that whole idea of being able to set up a more open-ended environment in which to kind of experiment.
Right.
You know, that's kind of where my head's at right now, is to go, all right, let me give, you know, anybody who's listening to this an opportunity to kind of like, you know, paint your own picture. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
I'm gonna use some descriptive terms, you know, with the least amount of words possible. You know, in most instances, with the least amount of words possible. That don't. It's like, you know, the cover of a book. You know, generally speaking, really good books don't. I mean, with fantasy being a notable exception, you know, where, you know, that in order to sell it, like sci-fi and fantasy, the artwork tended to try to be as literal and descriptive as possible to tell you what's inside the box.
Right.
You know, but you know, you look at like Stephen King books, and you know, look at the cover of It. You know, there's nothing there. You know, there's nothing, or Cujo. There's nothing there to tell you what this book is about.
The
really,
Tommy knockers, the Tommy knockers. Oh, I hated that book.
Or The Stand. You know what I mean? The Stand is this sprawling epic that could have benefited from an editor.
Oh my God!
You know what I mean?
Verbose.
Yeah, but you know, like that cover tells you nothing. You're just you're buying it sight unseen, and you're taking the ride. You know, and that's what I'm trying to create something that's along those lines, where you go, you know, all right, and even with the artwork that I've done, if you look at, you know, the Bandcamp site for, you know, the records I've put out, you know, it's Staer, STAER.bandcamp.com, right? And you look at my first EP, and then you look at the three that have followed. The first one is kind of the odd one out musically, because I hadn't quite really figured out. I mean, you can hear some common threads, but like things really started to gel after that was, you know, out of my system. You know what I mean?
Right.
I put that out there. It's still up as a pay what you want thing. If you want it for free, you can download it for free. If you want to give me a couple of bucks for it, I greatly appreciate that. That just all goes into the production fund for things. But things started to kind of take on their own identity, and you know, an aesthetic once I started working on the second one. And then everything subsequent, kind of, you look and it's like it's got this cohesive sort of look to it, that it's abstract. It's, you know, all the artwork is always abstract, and it's not designed to be representational necessarily, but it's just designed to evoke a theme. You know what I mean? Like there was I did an EP called Syzygy, and it's funny. Someone asked me, like, "Man, do you watch this?" I don't even remember the name of the show, the OC. And they're like, "Do you watch the OC?" I'm like, "No, I don't. You know, I haven't. You know, like,
no.
should I? You know, like they're like, "Oh wow, you know, well, you did this album called Syzygy, and you did this EP called The Garden of Forking Paths, and you've got these songs with these names, and apparently they're all titles of episodes of this show, the OC." And I'm like, "No, this is really weird. This is freaky. Like, what the heck?" And I looked, and I'm like, "Whoa." I mean, I'm really into quantum physics,
pure
and
coincidence kind of thing, but
absolutely operating in a vacuum. You know, I had no idea. But you know, if you thought there was a connection, there actually isn't. But now that I go back, I'm like, huh, weird. So, but like on this album Syzygy that I did, you know, Syzygy is a alignment of planets. You know what I mean? Where, like, you know, you have the sun, earth, moon, Syzygy, where everything is all in a straight line.
Yeah.
And the artwork is, you know, it's got these three spheres that are in alignment with one another. There's, you know, one that's in the foreground, there's one in the midground, and there's one in the background, and they all form these sort of concentric circles. and the title of the record isn't really even on the cover. It's on the spine, but it's not anywhere on the cover of the record. It just says, it has the name of the project. It just says Staer, and there's these three spheres. And the Garden of Forking Paths, which was an EP that I did subsequent to Syzygy, is a reference to some reading that I'd been doing on chaos theory and quantum mechanics and really cool heady physics shit, where it's all theoretical.
We like
talking about
some physics over here.
Dude, so here I am, and this is where the listeners can probably go like, all right, I dig what this dude's about, or they're going to get completely lost. But so here I am reading about the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, a certain interpretation about the way that states of indeterminacy would collapse into one definite state or the other, and whether or not all possibilities exist on some timeline or another, and there's like a parallel worlds, multiple universes kind of thing, where this is shit that is really discussed in serious academic circles about how things like quantum mechanics operate, because there's a lot of that we don't understand about, wave particle duality, light. It travels as a wave, but it also behaves like a particle. What the fuck? You know what I mean? Like when we measure for waves, we find waves. When we measure for particles, we observe particles.
Right.
Like
best demonstrated by the slot experiment and the interference wave pattern that's produced on the other end of that.
Yeah. It's very, very interesting stuff. And when you think about the implications that has for what we perceive as our current reality, it's very interesting, and it makes you think about, when you think about the things that we do as people and the decisions we make each day being a product of a 50-50 probability falling, when we talk about rolling dice in D&D and having a 50-50%, outcome, well, is there a world where that 50-50 probability fell the other way? And are there these infinitely branching parallel worlds that exist where, and a lot of sci-fi centers around that, like, oh, what if this, what if that, what if, like we weren't the dominant life form on the planet and we grew up as the cats, and the cats are running the world, like it's just weird stuff, and so that's probably the most verbose way of saying, well, that's what that record was about, and it was my first experiment with something that was, and if I'm talking too much, feel free to editorial.
No, you're
like,
fine.
dude, shut the fuck up. Let us get a word in edgewise.
No. I mean, because if they say anything, it's just going to go down that same path. I mean, the only thing that I was going to ask is if you'd heard of OR. I had to ask.
Yeah.
Of what?
OR.
Orchestrated
reduction of quantum entangled information in microtubulars of the brain. It's a theory of consciousness, quantum consciousness, by Stuart Hamerhoff and Roger Penrose. And, where in Roger Penrose talks about objective reduction being that the fine scale structure of space-time cuts off any of the possibilities of there being a parallel universe. And so like a macro quantum wave function collapsation occurs so that only one reality exists, and it's connected to cytosine, which is a chemical that's found on the synaptic circuit between the neural nodes of the brain that is in a liquid and gel-like state. And in the liquid-like state, it helps propagate the biochemical energy through all the neural nodes that it takes to recognize a stimulus. And in its gel-like state, it protects against dissidence, or the second law of thermodynamics, for that wave function collapsing, and it causes quantum entanglement to occur inside the brain. And there is a connection between the quantum
instance based.
Yeah, and there's a connection with the quantum world and the cytoskeletal structure of the cells inside of neurons when they line up in dipolar fashion, which normally happens more when you take psychotropic substances and less when you have anesthetics, and that's how Stuart Hammerhoff
Right.
got involved in it because he was a anesthesiologist.
Yeah.
We talk about this stuff a lot
It's like,
all the time.
It's like one of our most downloaded podcasts of all time.
Especially in Germany.
Weirdly, it was on quantum consciousness. We did it a long
I am
time
so fucking glad I agreed to do this interview.
ago. Bro, you have no idea, man. We will go deep in the weeds on some of this stuff. We really love it. Yeah, I love this stuff. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, just the fact that you were able to hammer all that out, and I'm like, okay, quantum entanglement. Yeah, man, I'm there. Like, I'm there with that. Like, and then you're talking about brain structure and neurochemical structures and how things affect determinacy, and I'm just like,
Yep.
All right, dude, I'm taking this ride with you.
You got to get on this roller coaster.
Check it out.
It's
Check out
really
the
cool.
Yeah.
Quantum conscious, and it's starting to appear in textbooks now. I've been talking about this for at least 6 years, and it's when I just graduated from Ohio University, and I worked at the library, and new books would come in for sociology and psychology and anthropology, and there was like a chapter in each of those books talking about quantum consciousness.
Are you familiar? And I know you're going to say yes, but are you familiar with Robert Anton Wilson?
I am.
Okay. I know a lot of people know him as a writer of science fiction or fiction. He was one of the co-writers of the Illuminatus trilogy, and also, a big proponent of the whole Discordianism movement and stuff like that. But have you read any of his more scholarly things?
I have not.
Okay, he wrote a fantastic book. Now we're not talking about music anymore.
Or are we?
Right.
Well, we are. But this is like if you want to get into things about like philosophy and stuff, which I understand is a pretty good portion of what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, that was my minor too. So
Wilson wrote a book called Quantum Psychology, and it applies principles of quantum mechanics and how one writes about, we know things about like observation of things like, like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle and things like that, and about how an observation affects sometimes experimental outcomes, right?
Right.
Okay. So it's about how we as humans
affect the outcome of reality.
Yes,
because that's kind of at the principal crux of what ORCOR is stipulating, that on that edge of the wave function collapse that's constantly collapsing, which is your stream of consciousness, that you have a bit of influence. It's determinate and also indeterminate, which solves some sort of psychological problems that they've had for a long time when they talk about intelligence and consciousness coming from emergent properties.
The hard problem of consciousness, right?
Yeah. So it's able to at least explain that, I guess not really solve it, but to explain it within its own mechanism of explanation.
Or at least provide a framework. You know what I mean? Like an interpretation. Like, okay, here's one way you can look at this problem and have it sort of, provide a sort of a lattice work in which, it's self-supporting and it makes sense. It may not, really play out in anything else in an experimental model, but here's a model.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like any good theory would do, it's able to reinterpret and explain.
Yeah. One of the things that I took away from quantum psychology is that Wilson talks about a language called E prime. And E prime is a way of modifying language, but also thought processes in order to remove is.
Okay.
So
non-Aristotelian type stuff here now.
Yep.
Okay, now you're in my playground. I'm 22 years trained as a salesperson, so I'm fascinated by things like semantics and Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian logic models. Oh boy.
Dude, and honestly, it helps me navigate the world in a more honest way. Because again, coming from a sales perspective, I've worked for a bunch of big corporations in the music industry as a salesperson, and I've been very successful because, as you may already tell from just the way this interview is going, I try to be very very direct, very open, very honest about things.
Yep.
And by crafting your words, and I use is a lot, but when it comes to effective communication, where I really have to, distill a concept or present an interpretation of what I believe my perception of a situation to be, especially when it's a sensitive situation.
Right.
E prime takes over, and I begin selecting words that suddenly become very subjective.
Okay.
And it's no longer the car is black, but it's, to my eye, the car appears black.
Sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or
Okay.
It happened at 7 p.m. Well, as I recall, it was around 7 p.m.
Right.
From my observation of the clock, I remember having looked at the clock and the clock said it was 7 p.m. Right. Removing these definite articles of isness, which gets back to the Aristotelian thing.
Yep.
By removing that bullshit, that bullshit semantic construction of isness, of any intrinsic anythingness of an object or an observation or even a philosophy.
Right.
You're suddenly realizing that a very great amount of what we each experience as consciousness on the planet as we interact with one another is extremely subjective.
It's totally derivative too, man. It's derivative of memories, and like 80% of what we consider to be reality is just constructs from your brain.
And it's bullshit.
Yeah.
It's like you are the most effective bullshit artist that you know,
especially to yourself. Yep.
And that's what I mean. Like you are the most effective bullshit artist that you know, because your memories are flawed.
Oh, and you can talk yourself into fucking anything if you really, it's the easiest person in the world to talk into doing something is yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. You are the biggest proponent of your own self-deception, and you can really hoodwink yourself into perpetuating a lot of bad behavior and a lot of bad thought processes, simply because you don't realize that you remember it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that's something that has really helped me grow as a person in relationships, that, my partner will call me out on, no, dude, that's not how it happened.
Right.
I'm like, what the fuck do you mean that's not how it happened?
Right.
And then they're like, no, you may think you said this, but this is what you actually said.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh fuck. You know what? You're right. Like
Worse, have you ever seen it recorded or audio recorded? Like when you think something went one way, and then you go back and you're like, yay. And then you go back and look at it and go, oh God, like what happened there?
So let's talk about the show that I just played this weekend with a band that I'm a part of called Pretty Hate Machine. We're a Nine Inch Nails tribute band, and we just played our first gig ever together. We're sort of a super group. There's a lot of people that have come from a lot of disparate, sources, a couple people that play in one band, a couple people that play in another band, me, another guy. And we all came together and, got banded together by one cat who's kind of like the Danny Ocean of the whole thing, the ringleader, who's like, all right, I need you to do the synthesizer parts because you're really good at that. And I've got a great guitar player and a great bass, blah, 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 blah. So we played. Literally for the first time that we played together, we played to a sold out crowd at the Fillmore in Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yeah,
2,100 people. It was fucking unbelievable.
That's bonkers.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's great.
And so like no pressure or anything, right?
Out the gate. Let's go. Almost 3,000. Right.
Literally that day was earlier that day was the first time that we had gotten together with every member of the band on the stage when we were doing our sound check.
Like physically together for the first time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like we did any remote rehearsals. I had built the backing tracks and stuff like that.
It's crazy, isn't it? How this works now.
And sent them, I've been like, all right, here's what I did. I'm muting these parts because I took all the songs that we did and I recreated them from scratch using, doing a lot of research and being like, all right, what instruments did they have at the time? All right, so that's probably how they made these sounds, blah, 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 blah. And then, all right,
you're
what were
reverse
the
engineering it, literally, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I went back and because of who I've met in my career, I've had some access to ask a couple of people a couple of very short, succinct questions about, on such and such song, like,
Yeah, you got the inside gouge, right? You're like,
Yeah,
you got the cheat sheet.
yeah, but like, it's not like they're handing me the multi-tracks, and saying like, all right, just drag and drop this into your Pro Tool session. It's not like that. The record company owns that shit. I still had to do the heavy lifting myself, but we to land the plane, they had done some rehearsals. I had done my own rehearsals, but like literally we had not done any actual playing together until this gig.
Right.
And that was our first time doing it.
Wow.
Yeah, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, just like that. I don't even know how we got on that, but
Eric, how did we get on that? Usually he's pretty good about keeping us on navigation.
we're talking about, oh gosh.
Well, we were going down the road of Aristotelian and non-Aristotelian logic models, and
we'd had some interesting terrain behind us. That's why I'm not sure. Like we've covered some ground in the last 20 minutes, like some quantum and some psychology, and then we just ended up with.
Definitely went airborne a couple of times.
That's the beauty of podcasts, man. That's what this is an open conversation. That's a great thing about this, right? Because it can get weird. It's still interesting.
Sure is getting weird, but
welcome to the No Shit Cast.
I'm into it. No shit. But one of the things that I took away from that was, gosh, really, how did I get into this? And someone's going to roll it back and rewind and go, hey, buddy.
It was like this.
Yeah.
They have that
remembering
ability.
it differently. That's what it is. It's remembering things differently. Great. Awesome.
Excellent.
And when you said, that's what it is. This is literally what it's about. It's about, I went back and we had filmed the show.
Right.
And
okay. Yep.
I, in the heat of the moment, was like, man, I really messed up. We only had that one rehearsal, and man, I must have really blown it. And I go back and I look at it and I'm like, because people after the show were like, man, you guys fucking killed it. This is amazing. And all my brain can focus on is, yeah, but I hit that one note wrong. And I go back and I watch the video and I'm like, fuck, man, we really did kill it. Like, wow, that was really good. I mean, it's live, and there were some mistakes made, and clearly it was our first show together. And but then I am a bit of a cheerleader for my co-musicians, and I'm like, dude, to our singer Adam, I was like, dude, go back and look at Nine Inch Nails' performance at Woodstock '94. Mike wasn't working through like half of those songs. You know what I mean? Like the vocals dropped out, but it was this culture changing moment where like that's when Nine Inch Nails blew up and became like a household name, and David Letterman would chased them for a year trying to get them to play on the shows because of what they did at Woodstock. It's less about what actually happened, and it's about people's takeaway and what they remember from it. But like,
and that's tough too, man. Tribute stuff is rough because of the framework with which the audience hears the song. They're hearing it through their when they go and you go and see a tribute band, man, you got to be right on, because the fans that are rabid and willing enough to go see a tribute band, it's sort of an all or nothing proposition. And if they're
get it wrong,
it's bad.
They will know.
Yeah, you'll know.
What I mean?
Yep.
And I even had a cat come up and talk to us after the show, and he's like, man, I'm a big fan of that band. And, I hear a good amount of people trying to cover these songs, and, I'm a bit of a snob, and I was listening for stuff that I usually hear that's wrong. And I didn't hear it with you guys, like you really got it. I'm like, well, you're talking to someone who's on the autism spectrum. Let's just say, man, I was listening very deeply to those original multi-tracks to make sure I got it right. Because I mean, this is something that
is my thing,
right, buddy. Like not only am I a synthesizer nerd, I've also kind of got like, a personal connection to this stuff,
Yeah.
but I've also got a sense of, I know if it's right or wrong, and I don't want to do this wrong,
Right.
and that comes back to all the musical stuff. But to reel it back in and bring it back to the whole the quantum psychology thing, realizing that the mechanism of memory is a flawed thing, and the mechanism of perception is a flawed thing, and realizing that a lot of our failings to one another, as the interactions we have with one another as humans, you can develop a greater sense of empathy, and you can create you can cultivate in yourself a greater sense of how to be better in your interactions, or more honest in your interactions, by adopting that more. I mean, to some people it comes across as clinical when you say, well, it has been my experience that blank, or in my perception, from what I understand of this subject, blank. When you remove that isness, that very,
that's the mechanism with like what Eric was talking about. Like there's a portion of OR which seems to be self-deterministic. And okay, so what does that mean? Well, it means that you have some control, I guess, in a manner over which path this goes on, for sure. Okay. And what you're talking about is a methodology with which you can leverage to make sure that is as positive, or as a constructive, for lack of a better word, sort of experience. So that's the methodology behind the framework, I guess.
Yeah.
And it you know what, man, it works. That's the thing. That's why it lends so much credence to this kind of idea, is that you can use these methodologies that you're describing, Ian, and it will have a remarkable effect. It takes time, but it'll have a remarkable effect on your personal happiness, I guess.
Yeah. Also, Ohio University Library is connected to, it's one of the biggest, it is the largest networked library. It's networked to a bunch of public libraries and a bunch of other college libraries. So when you look through their catalog, you can get all these things, including journals and white papers, right? So I printed out about 15 white papers that they had done on OR, and one of the things that was calculated by Penrose was that there's only about 6 possibilities that ever bloom up before they're reduced in a quantum wave collapsing function down to one reality. And so that when you do have that influence, you're basically doing a 1 out of 5, right? And so, this methodology that you're talking about is a really good thing to do for the wet, warm, brain that's in linear time, to help it choose that sort of a ephemeral connection with reality.
Yep. And it becomes like a guide marker, or a compass heading, I think, is probably the better way to kind of think about it. But that's the methodology. And it's weird because it's what you're getting at is it's how we talk to ourselves. What we define is to be, or define things to be, and what we define ourselves to be, has a tremendous impact on that shit. It's crazy.
And how you choose to describe the world around you.
For sure.
Yeah.
And to be able to try to communicate concepts, to try to say, the car was black. You know what I mean? Maybe the car only looked black. You know what I mean? Maybe it wasn't actually black. You can say, I perceived the car's color to be black, but maybe it was dark out. You know what I mean? Maybe it's actually like a deep maroon. Who the hell knows?
Yeah.
But you're being more honest in your accounting of what ends up being very subjective.
When I heard it explained to me, like when that paradigm for me was broken about what reality, or what you think is real and what is real. And,
buddy.
And so I'm a big fan of this book. Alfred Grzycki wrote this book called Science and Sanity, and it's the study of general semantics, basically. Okay. And that's where I get a lot of this from. It's a fantastic book. It's definitely worth reading into. But the way it was sort of presented to me was because I was like, that's bullshit. I'm an engineer by trade, right? That's what I sort of do, controls and automation systems. And so my world is very literal. And the way I interpret my world tends to be very Boolean and Boolean logical, if then not else kind of stuff.
Yep.
A lot
of dichotomies.
Yeah, I mean, because that's just sort of the way after you live in that world of writing code and you start to, that's the way you sort of start interpreting the world. And what busted that for me was, so I was riding down the road with this cat and he was like saying, he was explaining this to me, like, only 20% of what your sensors actually pick up is reality. The other 80% of what you think reality is, your brain just makes up from memories. And I'm like, oh, I don't know about that, man. And he goes, okay. He goes, you tell me this. He goes, see that house over there? I go, yeah. He goes, see the asphalt shingles on that house? I go, yeah. He goes, they're bumpy and scratchy, right? I go, yeah. He goes, are you sure? Or is that just your memory telling you that that's the way they feel?
Exactly.
And I was like, oh, fuck. Like, he goes, you don't know that that's the case, but your brain just told you that that's a fact because your exposure to these things over many, many years tells you that that's what they feel like, right? But that's not necessarily true. But if you were to give deposition or if you were to give testimony, what did the shingles feel like? Well, they were scratchy. Well, did you touch them? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that becomes a distinction. Yeah. But that sort of busted it for me. And I was like, holy crap, that's right. Because what you run into is a processing error. Your brain can only consume so much data from your senses. Actually, it tends to only consume them from certain senses under focus, right? Yeah. But when you're sort of drifting through the world on autopilot, as it were, and you're just absorbing, really all you're looking for is the shit that goes, that jumps out that says, hey, run, or like that's your heightened state. Yeah. But everything else is just your construct, is just building this image of what has happened into a memory where the vast majority of the information, you're not really sure it's true or not. You didn't run around and test all this stuff.
Even those stimuli that say run, right? That's all that is just your normal pattern recognition software that's running.
Right. Yeah.
Detects an anomaly.
Yeah, I call it lizard brain shit, right? It's like run, eat, fight, all that stuff.
It's totally lizard brain shit. And you're like, the things that cause those, those fight or flight reflexes are when the normal gap filling perception, white noise that your brain just normally does that fills in a bunch of bullshit for you, lying to you, saying that things are that they are. If something pops out as being markedly different, like, why is that watermelon there? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and I hope you get that reference, but like,
I don't, but I'm still laughing. So I don't know. Maybe I do.
Buckaroo Banzai.
Okay, yeah. I was thinking a Gallagher.
No, there's a scene in the film, The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension, where they're like, it's during an action sequence and they run through this one section of laboratory and Jeff Goldblum stops and goes, why is there a watermelon there? And the guy he's running with says, I'll tell you later. And they never explain it. It's just this great, really super Dadaist moment that you realize that like the entire movie is fucking with you.
Yeah, that's all it's doing,
great.
Right.
But like, but it's like that. It's like, you've got this fourth wall breaking thing where like your perception kind of goes, something's different here, and that's why camouflage works, is because it breaks up these patterns and it makes something, you don't see a silhouette anymore. Your brain just goes, oh yeah, that's leaves. Cause you think it's leaves, you don't see a person standing there, or you don't, or natural camouflage, like a predator, like a leopard or a tiger has stripes.
And let's think about how reliable this thing is. How many times have you personally, as anybody, walked up to something and went, oh, that's XYZ, And then when you get close to it, you go, oh shit, that's not XYZ, that's something else, you know, like it's
that's ABC.
Like oh, that's a hose. No, that's a fucking snake, you know, like these things happen. So that tells you that when your brain's filling this shit in.
That's a deer. No, it's a mailbox. Okay.
You know, even it can be wrong until it gets better data or more focused data. Yeah. So, and the stuff that's happening in your periphery, forget it. That might as well just be made up. Like, that's about how reliable that shit really is. Yeah, it's crazy.
Your perception, your mechanisms of perception are like, it's like a toddler commenting on, like physics or something
Quantum
like that.
physics, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it has no idea what it's actually talking about, but it's spewing out running commentary.
Yeah.
Nonstop.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
Nonstop.
understand.
It's amazing. And
Blue balloon truck train. Yeah, it's like what is happening here?
you're like, and then you come to your senses. You're like, dude, that's not a train,
Right.
You know what I mean? And especially with music, like listening to music, especially when you're dealing with something that's abstract, like you can come into things and be like, I thought I heard something in there.
Yeah.
It's not that at all.
Yeah.
And that's now we're gonna take a massive left turn and bring it back to why abstract music is appealing to me, which is because with your mechanisms of perception like that, I don't have to tell you what you think you're hearing. You know what I mean? And there's things when you're dealing with textural sounds that aren't necessarily, especially when you get into things like a modular synthesizer, because you can basically create completely new sounds from scratch and then mangle the ever-loving crap out of them.
Eric and I were talking about this tonight, and this leads me to a question. Okay,
I have a question too.
And so I was talking about with the different effects and the different setup and stuff that we've developed over the time of doing the show, and how we've sort of distilled it down into a good mic sound and all of this was all a discovery process.
Aside from the mixer issue.
Yeah, except for that. Yeah. Thanks for helping us fix that, by the way.
Thanks, man. We appreciate it.
Welcome.
But what you also find out when you start getting all these bells and whistles is that when you add too many of them, you get to a point where what comes out the other end is nothing. There's nothing appealing about it at all. It becomes very unappealing, I guess, to belabor the point. But where do you decide because especially given the sort of cinematic and ambience and the different things that you do, where do you decide when you're done? Like, how do you figure that out? Like, okay, this is done.
Yeah.
Like I don't need to fuck with it anymore.
An axiom that I took away with a great amount of gravity was great design is complete when there is nothing more to take away.
All right. Cool.
Now, in practice, how does that manifest? Like, how would you do that in your process? Are you talking about? Eric has me do this thing when I do music where he goes, go in and start muting tracks.
That's exactly what I mean.
Oh, okay.
When there's nothing more to be taken away.
Yeah.
The thing is baked.
I don't think I wrote anything that I haven't gotten rid of like 2 or 3 tracks.
And where that comes into play in my own personal process is that usually I don't decide to quote unquote start hitting record on something until I've got a general idea that something's going somewhere. I
gotcha.
A lot of times things will come out of, I got a new piece of gear and I noodled around with it and I'm like, okay, here's an idea. All right, cool. Stick that in the back of the head, then come back to it a couple days later and be like, all right, let me revisit this idea and kind of get a feel for what it's all about. And then, okay, you know what? This would work, but I want to add like a little bit of texture underneath it. Okay, so what do I have in my library of 42 fucking synthesizers, that would complement this? And what I have to do is here's how that becomes manageable. On the EP Syzygy, it's the modular synthesizer. It's a digital piano. Technically, it's a sampling keyboard. It's an Ensoniq ASR10, but with a piano sample loaded on it.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah.
And some effects pedals. That's it. You know what I mean? And then with the Garden of Forking Paths, which was the more recent EP that I did, that's just a single track, but it's 20 minutes long. It was, here's this, collection of synthesizers that does these specific things, and just stay within that framework. Don't try to use everything all at once. It's just like being a lighting designer, don't turn on every light at once in every different color, because all you get is white. You know what I mean? All you're going to get bombarded with is bullshit. You know what I mean? If like they say, if everything is amplified, no one hears anything.
Right.
So if you've got all these things hitting your mechanism of perception,
Right.
you're not going to be able to really pick any one thing out, and there's going to be no distinction. There's going to be nothing to latch onto and go, all right, here's this thing.
That's one of the most important skills that a lot of new musicians that play in bands don't understand, is knowing when not to play is as important, if not more important, than knowing when and what to play.
That is literally one of the design parameters of literally one of the songs that was on the EP Syzygy. It's called Beacon. One of the things that helped that song happen was listening and not playing. There is a drone which runs throughout the entire tune, and it's actually present on the new album that's coming out. It's a live album, but it's not a live album like when you think of Kiss Alive or Iron Maiden's Live After Death. It was recorded live from radio broadcasts that I did on 2 shows, which were broadcast live to FM radio at WXPN in Philadelphia and WPRB in Princeton, New Jersey. But they were, recorded through, solid state logic, broadcast console or, whatever. But it was, very much basically a studio recording, but everything you were hearing was happening in real time.
Right.
It was a live performance. But what I'm saying is, this is a piece that I still play live in every show that I've been doing to support this album. It's a drone, which is a product of, a couple of oscillators in the modular that are, sound generation, function generating devices that are processed through some, distortion and some reverb and a bunch of different, effects modules or external pedals or whatever. And they're generating this thing which sounds very much to me sounds like the immediate, if someone wants to go to my Bandcamp page and find the track Beacon, which is on the EP Syzygy, but it's also featured on the upcoming album, which is called Telemetry. And this is going to break my own rule, so I'm a big believer in the exceptions that prove the rule and never buying into my own bullshit. I'm going to tell you what I heard when I heard it. And maybe this will now, as of, because we now measured its velocity, we don't know where it is.
Exactly. Right.
But Heisenberg's uncertainty principle rears its ugly head yet again. The SS Heisenberg, where we're going or how fast we're going, pick one.
Right.
But, what I heard and what informed the compositional process, or at least getting a feel for what this song was to me, was really my partner. She came in and heard what I was doing, and she's always been super supportive of this, and she's really into sound and sound design and stuff, and was like,
oh, that's great, man.
This sounds like, she's the kind of person that I'll be listening to gear demos,
right,
and I'll be listening to some really cool, that's how I ended up buying a Strymon Blue Sky reverb. It's a $300 reverb pedal or whatever. But she was listening to the demo. She's like, what is that? I'm like, that is a Strymon Blue Sky reverb pedal. She's like, it sounds amazing. Are you getting one? And I'm like, I guess I am now. Sounds cool. Awesome. Or I'll be listening to really whacked out, demonstrations of, cool boutique synthesizers. And she's like, what is that? I've never heard something that sounds like that before. I'm like, oh, that's a Nifonium, or that's whatever, Folk Tech Resonant Garden or something like that. And, we both very much enjoy listening to ambient music, and she turned me on to Radio Lab and cool podcasts that are, sometimes just about sound, and I'm like, man, I'm going to end up marrying you. You
Yeah.
know what? This is good. This has good portent for, I mean, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary, just this week,
Oh,
like it's
fantastic.
a super
Congrats.
functional relationship, and we help one another grow because we listen to one another, but we also call each other on our bullshit. And she's one of the people, no, for real,
You
but
got to
she's one of
have
the
that.
people
That's so
she has an
important.
eidetic memory. You know what I mean? She has an eidetic memory and is able to, without fail, accurately. I mean, and sometimes it's a bit of a hobble because, sometimes there's things you don't want to remember
That's
exactly.
for sure.
But, she is able to remember things with precision where I have a faulty, memory mechanism where again, like I said, I am my own worst bullshit artist, and I have to be told sometimes, no, that's not how it
Yeah.
happened.
Hey,
But-
man, we win through association, and there's no association more important than that with your partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And that
Yeah,
suck,
for sure.
that person can be rocks in your pockets or a float. It's you just got to figure that out and get the right
Yeah.
one. But it's
thankfully,
amazing
I
when
mean,
you get
through-
the right one. It's amazing.
I mean, and to think about, again, talking about, the Garden of Forking Paths and all these, parallel worlds that could have happened. I mean, like I had to go
Right.
through a lot of, I had to go through a lot of iterations of this simulation to find the one that worked. You know what I mean? There's a lot of failures that, are in the rearview mirror. And
Their experience, their wisdom, their right.
Oh,
they're,
yeah.
They're
Their
part
lessons
of
learned.
Part of that process. Yeah.
Oh,
definitely.
yeah. But, to get to this point, I had to learn a lot about, what I had done incorrectly in the past that led me to this particular position here, and own that and grow from it and use it as a
It's a grind.
jumping off point. Yeah.
It's a grind.
But-
It's the thing you find out with we've had several artists on the show and professional artists. And what you really find out, what's under the hood of that sucker? Work. A lot
Yeah.
of fucking work. That's what's under the hood. And
Anything
dedication.
successful
Yeah.
never happened overnight.
Nope. It's always a process that gets distilled down and turns into something later.
Sure.
I think the worst thing that can happen to somebody is the first time they try to do something to be wildly successful, because then it sets the benchmark that it's that easy. You follow me?
It doesn't prepare you for the
soul crushing
of failure. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It does not prepare you in any way to deal with the consequences of not having shit work out.
Yeah,
You know
it's
what
crazy.
I mean? And the best results I've had with artistic endeavors or even personal relationships, I mean, like, are in situations where I've had to, even as a lighting director, I mean, I've had some of the best days I've had, or some of the most profound learning experiences
Sure.
I've had have been when I accidentally realized that 3 hours into a programming session that I committed a grave error that has only become apparent right now, that I do not have enough steps of undo to go back and fix.
Oh yeah.
And what I have to do is hit the delete button and go, buddy, guess what? You've got to start
You're
fresh.
starting over.
You've got to reinitialize this entire thing,
Yeah.
reformat the hard drive, and fucking start over.
I've been
But
there.
you know what? And then the best part is when you do it twice in a row.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you go, all right, but guess what? Now I've learned to look out for the mistakes that I've made, and I've also become faster. You know what I mean? Because I know that, like,
the painful mistakes are the ones you don't do very often. Again.
Normally.
Normally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's like, ouch, that hurt. Don't do that again.
Sure.
Hey, man,
And so
I got to ask you a question.
Go.
Is it noodling or doodling when someone is, just doing ad libs on a keyboard? Which is it for you?
For me, it's noodling.
It's noodling. Okay, because I've heard it
Yeah.
both ways, and I'm trying to figure out if this is like an East Coast, West Coast thing or how this breaks apart. So I don't get to ask this question a lot, but everybody so far has said it's noodling. Okay, but everybody I've talked to has been East Coast. I wonder if it's a regional thing.
Could be.
I don't know.
I have a question.
Go.
Do you ever write music like at, say, 72 to 75 beats per minute to do biorhythm things, or do you ever tune your keyboards to a non-traditional frequency like
What,
these.
like 432?
Well, a non-traditional frequency.
Look
Yeah.
how he just landed right
No.
fucking on that.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Do you ever do anything like that?
Not intentionally.
Okay, just curious.
However, if you listen to my stuff, I have found that naturally a lot of the stuff that, I mean, maybe it's just because that's where the tempo of the delay that I'm using, because it's all analog, because it doesn't have any detents, and I'm not typing any numbers in. These are all analog controls that just happen to land in a place.
Gotcha.
So all the clocks are all analog. It's just basically a square wave that's running, that's generating tick, 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 as some sort of timing reference for whatever. So none of this in any way, shape, or form starts as me typing a number in anywhere. Again, that comes from using hardware and using analog synthesizers where stuff drifts, and it may start, but
Well, you create dissonance and things that become very organic that way in the feel, right? Because of the dissonance between the tracks.
and entropic.
Yeah. Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it sometimes can be catastrophic, where, like, again, talking about Beacon.
Complementary, not destructive waveforms. Sure.
Good. You know what I mean? Like, in the song Beacon that I was talking about before, where I'm going to wrap up that one note that I was talking on, which is that it's this drone that has crests and troughs, and it has moments of intensity and moments of silence. And I was like, all right, this can't be it. But when you're saying, like, when do I know I'm done? What it was, okay, here's this drone that's happening. And all I did was just listen to the silences and just put one or two piano notes in there. You know what I mean? Just listen to a silence. And even like when you said, sometimes the most important thing to do is not to play, just listen to that silence and go, does there need to be something in there? Does there need to be a syllable in there right now? Or should I just shut up and let that sentence that just got spoken, let that hang,
Right.
But here's where it gets sketchy and entropic and pants shitting, is I play that live. And the thing is, that drone that's in there has a definite, and you say, do I ever tune to a specific frequency or anything? No, I don't. But I know where that
drift goes.
Yeah. And I know what sounds right, and I know what sounds wrong.
Yeah.
And since it's an analog synthesizer and the oscillators drift over time, I've come back to it after 4 or 5 days, turned up the volume on it, and it is out.
Huh.
Way out. And then it's like, there are so many knob settings which comprise what that sound is doing, again, because it's not a preset that I can just call up on a digital instrument. There are so many knobs that may have drifted. There's so many different variables.
Well, you're dealing with actual potentiometers here and things like that. So there's just drift. Temperature will change them. I mean, there's so many variables, right?
That's exactly what causes it. Is it can be like, even during, the reason that Telemetry, the new album, it's a composite of two performances, was that there's one section of one song that I didn't even realize it when I originally did the radio concert, but there was a section where some temperature drift had happened because the air conditioner in the radio station kicked on, and it knocked one of my oscillators out of tune, and I didn't even realize it until afterwards. And I listened to the recording. I was like, man, that's out. And I was like, well, let me listen to the other one. And it's not disingenuous, because I clearly label, these tracks were recorded on such and such date on such and such show, and this track was recorded on such and such date on such and such show. But it's edited together in a way that it's imperceptible.
Yeah.
That it's not, like, I had a great engineer, Jeff Town, who's the producer of Echoes, which is a show that airs nightly on NPR, is a personal associate of mine, and he helped me sequence it together and edit it together. He's a great editor. He writes scholarly papers for transom.org, and he's an engineer's engineer, fantastic engineer. and kind of, because I was like, yeah, how do I approach this particular problem of this, this temperature drift happened, and I want to be honest, and I want to have these still be live performances, but I also don't want to. I have a real problem charging people money for something that's substandard. So I don't want to, be like, it's out of tune, but who
It's
cares?
good enough. Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, good enough doesn't exist
Yeah.
for me. You know what I mean? Like, I won't turn in work that's just good enough, because that's, then why the hell am I here? You know what I mean? Like, why am I here, and why am I charging? I mean, I charge $10 for a CD, and I know what $10 is, because I know when I get $10 from somebody for a CD that I made, I go, cool, I can buy groceries.
Right. Yeah.
I can, buy cat food. I can,
buy synthesizers.
Not even, buddy. I mean, $10 doesn't buy you a whole lot in synthesizers.
You have to sell chunks of your soul for that. Right?
Well, to talk about that briefly, like, I've got all these synthesizers, but honestly, I'm not made of money. I'm not rich. You know what I mean? Like, and a lot of this stuff has just kind of landed in my lap.
Because you're in it.
Yeah, and you're drawing it to you.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. And we could talk about intention, and we could talk about all sorts of things that, get into the metaphysical aspect of what I do, which is real. I mean, it's there. You know what I mean? I did an entire performance with if you guys are into metaphysical stuff, I will briefly tell you that back in October, when I first did the Garden of Forking Paths, and I did my first live performance of it, I used a 5-watt RGB laser to do real-time sigil magic.
Okay. Like on a screen or something, like projected. Okay,
projected.
Yeah.
So I came up with
and sigil magic is like the specific symbols and things like that for.
Yes.
And there's an intention of magical properties, or so, I guess, for lack of a better word, for this kind of.
Let's just say that, if we're going to codify really quickly and not get too woo about it, because I try to approach things, it seems like everybody involved in this is, coming from things, with a pretty scientific approach to things, but I do still, even with all the attention to scientific rigor and, removing the Aristotelian isness of things, I still do believe that there's room for things that we don't quite have systems to codify. And that can sometimes be referred to as magic.
Well, we'd be foolish to believe that we know how to measure everything there is.
At the very least, a Joseph Campbell approach is still a really strong approach in terms of symbolism and that sort of a situation, I think. Like
updating the myths and the archetypes kind of situation.
Just the idea that the archetypes exist and have been used and can be used, and that there is some substance to that idea.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, they work. That's why things like tarot decks feel so organic and real. A lot of that has to do with the fact that they just basically land on every major human archetype, so it's going to feel relevant to anybody.
I was just telling
not a
Matt upstairs that I worked as a psychic on a psychic line for 6 years, reading a Rider-Waite deck and doing Celtic cross spreads.
Yeah, he's got an interesting past.
But I mean, some of that can come down to, like, I greatly enjoy things like Penn and Teller's Fool Us, where it's not really magic. This is just prestidigitation.
Trickery.
You know what I mean? This is just
legerdemain and prestidigitation.
Absolutely. What I'm talking about more is about, like, I think that in general, we have an ability to focus our intentions on things, and when we have a way to clearly focus that, some people do it through religion and prayer, you know what I mean? So they will ask God, for a blessing that they want, and they will pray, and you will see that happen. And I'm sorry if this starts to really dive off into some pretty interesting territory, but
don't be sorry.
Faith of any kind can be a very powerful thing, but it can be a dangerous weapon to wield. But the idea of focusing one's willpower, whether you're praying for it, whether you're just, psyching yourself up for something, like if you want to get Eastern about it and talking about like things like chi and breathing and focus and things like that, the idea of sigil magic is just another way to approach that. And that's something that, if you look into what, I mean, there's like, are you familiar with Grant Morrison?
That doesn't ring a bell with me.
Nope.
Grant Morrison is a comic writer and author and pretty renowned chaos magician. He wrote a bunch of titles. He's been a writer on I don't want to sit there and like run down the list of all of them because I know I might get one or two of them slightly inaccurate, but I believe he's been involved with a lot of major titles for major published comic books, but he also does a great deal of work on the lecture circuit. He's done some lesser known books, like a book that I read called Nameless, and was also a writer on a very popular 90s comic called The Invisibles. And he is very much he has a great, even if you just go on YouTube and you look up Grant Morrison, you'll probably find a talk he did where he talks about how the idea of sigil magic can be a very effective way to focus one's will onto the world around you just by giving you some type of an object to focus on. And what it does is
narrows intention.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like
that's why we put crosses in our houses too.
Right.
It keeps
or a
us
voodoo doll
or whatever it is. Yep.
Yeah. Or any type of symbol like that, which has a representational aspect to it. It's just a way to kind of like, take an idea and codify it into a symbol.
Yeah, and then make it omnipresent. That way, it helps focus intention. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, those are symbols have been used for a long, long ass time. I mean, we were even warned against it in the Hebrew Bible, right? About graven images and these kinds of things, how dangerous they could also be.
Yes.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the human condition for damn sure. Absolutely. No disputing that. Yep.
Yeah. So I did that,
So this is a way for you to kind of create something for the audience to focus on too, that becomes sort of separate from yourself, where you can say, hey, check this out. And it sets an intention for the music that goes even just beyond the audio portion of it. You're starting to give the audience a methodology with which in your live performances to connect with your art form on a spiritual level too, so to speak, or a very powerful symbological level. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely a grand experiment. I haven't, the main problem with it is like, I'm trying to figure out how to do it. And it was, I think I bit off more than I could chew in that, as an operator of a high powered laser, you have certain legal responsibilities.
Yeah.
And, I had to be watching the beam path the whole time as I'm playing music. And, I have, like on my keyboard, I had my big red button, I mean? Like it's
the emergency stop button. Yeah,
exactly. So, I said, all right, and it took me a very long time because obviously this is, something that's, very important to do. I was very sure to make sure that everything was set up safely before I started the performance, make sure that, I had all the right, zoning and masking and stuff like that. And it looked good and it was safe and everything like that. But like making sure that all those situations were satisfied took up so much of my time prior to the performance that was what I was focusing on, was making sure, all right, is the laser working? Is it safe? Is someone going to get hit? No, okay, cool. It's at the proper height. I've got, and that's mostly what I was thinking of.
You need a lighting guy.
Yeah.
And that's, that's the thing is like, I need one of the things I'm learning to do now is to compartmentalize,
offload some shit, brother. Yeah,
exactly.
Yep.
And now what I'm doing is I'm not doing any of the grand experiments like that, where I'm not like trying to do too much. I'm not trying to bring in, video wall and, things like that. And I'm not, what I'm trying to do is like for the last couple of shows I've played, I've either told the lighting person or I've brought my own, 2 or 3 lights at maximum. And, if you look at any of the photos, that have, come up on, on my Facebook page or, whatever, like
Right.
they're starting to develop, just like with the album art, they're starting to develop a unified aesthetic where you can kind of
Yeah.
look at it and go, okay, that's me. And
Recognizable
it's yeah,
aesthetic. Yep.
and all it is, it's something as dumb as, all right, from my left side I want amber light, and from my right side I want something that's as close to UV as you can get.
Yeah.
So I've got a warm from one side and a cool from the other, and when they meet in the middle, they do this really cool sort of like salmon pink that's like a very weird pink. And it's just, but that's it. Like, and it's really simplistic, but it works.
But it works. Right.
And it scales. I can do it, if you've got 8 lights on one side in a house rig and 8 lights on the other, as long as you can set them to those 2 colors, that's all I need.
Man, you can
You know
get
what I mean?
so obsessed too with this. I mean, look, and you were talking about putting somebody in. I think Pink Floyd had, remember the oil lamp? Someone was sitting back there dropping drops of colored oil basically on a lamp that they were projecting. Like
Sure.
that became an art in and of itself, was the person that did that, because depending on who was doing it, it worked different. You know what I mean? Like, so that compartmentalization, right? They weren't worried about that. It just happened to work, kind of thing,
Yeah.
right? They had somebody else handling that shit that was just dedicated to where that fit in the show. It's like the person with the triangle in the school band, ding.
Yeah. Yeah. There's that one note where you got to hit the triangle,
you
or
gotta have
you
that
got to
person
clicks
there.
the wood blocks together.
Hey man, I gotta start getting Eric off to bed here. He's gonna turn into a pumpkin, man. So would you mind doing? I want to go down the. Now we know who we got on the. So we could do like a whole metaphysical thing with you. There's so many different roads, and you're great to talk to and interesting as fuck. So, but so just kind of wrap up, okay?
Let's wrap it up,
Great
because I
podcast.
realize I've been talking you guys' asses off for the last 3 hours.
We love people
Pretty
like
awesome.
you, and yeah, mucho grateful about it, man, because this is the kind of stuff we like to do. The podcast gives you the ability to kind of go really deep in the weeds on subjects and really understand how people get places, and you just don't get this anywhere else. So we like to let people explain themselves. It's sort of our thing most of the time.
I like
Eric?
being given the opportunity to take things to their logical or illogical conclusion, or not conclude ever at all.
So make sure we get out there. Tell people where you prefer them to find you. Obviously, Bandcamp, how they find you, websites, Facebook, that kind of stuff, so they can connect with you and go listen to this, and then we'll wrap up after that, bud. But how do people get it? What's the best way for them to get a hold of you or to find your music
All right. Well, first of all, my solo project is my last name. It's Staer, but it's stylized as ST triangle ER. So the best, most central way to find it is to go to Staer, that's STAER.bandcamp.com, and that has all the musical releases up there. I've got an album right now called Telemetry, which is going to be released on September 3rd. I just got it back from the pressing plant. It looks gorgeous. It sounds amazing. It's in pre-order right now, and when you pre-order it on Bandcamp, you get a track right at the moment that you pre-order it, and it's definitely not some throwaway track. It's actually a 23-minute long track, so you get something to sit and digest and enjoy while you're waiting to actually get the CD sent to you, or for the album to fully release. And if you just want a digital, you can do that. You can also go to facebook.com/staer.us. That's STAER.US, as in Stephen. And that is the Facebook page where I will post photos of shows that have happened, where I will post things about, gigs that are coming up. And I will see, like a couple show hosts have done YouTube videos and whatever, and I will share those there. Speaking of shows that are coming up, for anyone who is reasonably local to the Philadelphia area, I have a show coming up on September 27th as part of the Event Horizon concert series. that will be taking place at the Rotunda, which is a venue on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. Doors are, I believe, at 7 p.m. Show commences at 8. It is a free show. It's part of an arts program that the University of Pennsylvania conducts. So the artists do get compensated, but the actual public isn't charged admission.
No cover. Right. Okay.
However, I will have CDs available. Kindly support me, and kindly do donate to the concert series because it is funded by donation as well. And what's really cool about this particular concert series is that there's a cat named Chef Jeff who shows up and also provides a rather resplendent buffet for attendees to have dinner while they're there. So it's a really neat thing. The first time I went, I was like, man, this is really fucking cool. And it's like good food. I mean, dude makes like chicken marsala and vegan dishes and vegetarian stuff, and also makes a couple of desserts and Black Forest cake and like whatever. Like it's really awesome. It's a cool vibe.
Food
so
and
there's
music,
that.
count me in.
Yeah, right.
Food and music, my two favorite things.
Hey, maybe we can all go down and do some music down at the September 21st Area 51 thing.
Oh my God, here we go again.
No, I'm just saying. Wouldn't
Was
that be
he
fun?
done? Well, I'm sorry.
Anyway, I am
not quite done.
Okay,
I
sorry.
I want to plug a couple of more things.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I was just.
I also play drums, electronic drums in a synth pop / industrial band called Silverwalks. I am not the primary songwriter in that. It's actually a cat named Dan McCullough, who I know because he was one of the promoters who booked Atari Teenage Riot back in the day when I was touring with them. Yeah. And we met and just talked and next thing you know, he's like, hey, I've got this band. I've finally got, songs written and I would love for you to be involved as a live drummer. I said, okay, cool, no problem. They have an album out called Songs of Love and Hate, which is on Distortion Productions based out of Pittsburgh. And you can Google them and find them. And, we've, played some live shows. Currently, we're kind of in a hiatus. We're going to film some videos, but definitely a cool thing to check out. And then also I am the sound designer, live keyboard player for that Nine Inch Nails tribute band called Pretty Hate Machine. They're based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. We played our first show this past weekend, which apparently by all accounts was absolutely friggin' fantastic.
Great
and
success.
We're already getting offers. Again, our first show was a sold out Live Nation event, 2,100 people in attendance. It apparently set venue records, and we've already been asked by other venues to headline. So if you do like Nine Inch Nails and
you see it live,
want to come check it out, we definitely apparently offer a high degree of verisimilitude. So that's pretty much it for me as far as plugging the stuff I've got going on. Please reach out as verbose and engaging as I'm trying to be here. I tend to also be, if you engage me via social media, I'm not a one word answer kind of person. I do try to kind of take time to think about my answers and answer honestly. And even, if I am on a certain level, I don't try to talk over people's heads.
Sure.
If like we were talking about some of the quantum physics stuff, and talking about some of the synthesizer related stuff. If you need shit broken down into more constituent elements, I'm more than happy to do that.
You may be hearing from some of our fans. we encourage them to start talking more, and oh boy, have they!
Well, there we go. Have them add me. On I do prefer that. If someone. I'm a little bit gun shy as far as adding strangers on my personal Facebook, but go ahead and add me, add the band page, take a look, take a listen, see if it's something you're interested in. And then if it's something you want to delve into on a deeper level, like Eric, added me and, I just kind of was like, all right, who's this guy? Okay. Yeah. He seems okay. Mutual instruments,
Yeah. And full disclosure, because it was kind of funny, right? Like, I'm literally sitting at home looking at what Facebook is suggesting, right? Like, you might like these people. And I'm looking through and I'm like, yeah, I probably would. Here's this guy, and he's got like all of these synthesizers around him, right? And it looks like this would be a really cool cat to talk to, right? And so I think it was like 2 days later, you had wrote a small post about not really understanding why people had friended you if they weren't going to interact with you. And so I thought, well, maybe I better give you some kind of rejoinder, you know, and explain why I did that, right? And that's kind of how we met, and that's how we met. It wasn't planned.
And that's what I'm saying is I'm earnest when I say that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that wasn't a bullshit line. It's like,
right.
I don't want to just
are.
have friends add me, you know, quote unquote friends. I don't want someone to collect me like I'm some fucking Pokemon
like a
card.
token
Right.
of some sort.
Because
You know,
this is much
like-
more enjoyable, isn't it?
Absolutely. You know what I mean? Like, and it, you know, I do have, again, because of my past professional history and the people with whom I've, you know, associated professionally, I try to guard those relationships because I don't want people using me as a vector to stalk somebody else that I've worked with.
Yeah, that
or
gets a
whatever,
little
because
weird, doesn't it? Yeah.
and that's bullshit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't want people, you know, like trying, you know, because this is just,
Right.
you know, like, you know, I don't want people coming into my workplace, quote unquote, trying to be my friend because I happen to know this other person. It's
Right.
like, dude, that's disingenuous.
And how much
I
more
don't-
pure can you get when someone's picking you just because of a picture? Like, I had no idea who you were or what you did
Well,
or
then-
anything.
And then your stars sort of
And-
cross too. Your paths.
Well, yeah,
sort of
I mean, like,
have since
yeah,
crossed
that's some-
professionally too, right?
Yeah, that's when we
Yeah.
found that out, and it was a surprise to us because
because you both
Yeah.
worked on the same album,
Yeah.
but didn't know the other person was actually
Yeah,
working on
both
the
of us
album.
just turned in remixes for the band Dissonance.
Yeah.
We both did remixes on an EP that literally just got released yesterday.
It's nuts.
And we're like, yeah. And like, we had no idea.
It was funny.
literally just synchronicity.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
crazy. It's like, oh, look at this
Yeah.
workplace friendship budding here, man. You didn't even know.
There it is.
cool.
I mean, and that's kind of, you know, it comes back to a guiding philosophy, and maybe we could just end here. Is just that, like, you know, don't be an asshole to other people because you never know when it's going to come
That's
back
right.
around.
Yeah,
It's amazing how
You
the
know,
world
like,
works, isn't it?
be cool.
Yep.
You know, be nice to people, and you know, like to quote, are you familiar with the movie Roadhouse?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Be nice.
Just be
Nice until it's time to not be nice.
That's right. And then be extremely violent.
Yeah. You know, how will we know when it's time to not be nice? I'll tell you.
Awesome stuff. Hey man, I'm looking forward to part 2 to this where we can go into the weeds. Man, there's so much shit we could have fun talking with you about. I'm telling you.
If
all
you
right.
ever end up with a couple of hours to fill up, I will gladly help you assist in that effort.
Awesome.
That's awesome. All right, thanks for listening, everybody. Check us out at www.noshitcast.com. It's KNOWSHITCAST.com. Make sure you hit those like and subscribe buttons. Leave us a comment. Eric would love to hear from you. And he always responds. I shouldn't put that out there. You don't always respond.
When you tell me,
Make sure to give us a rating on iTunes, etc. And if you really like what we do, give us a share. We'd really appreciate it. We'll catch you all next time. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye, Sickles.